Chapter 338. Suli didn't explain anything to Jining. She preferred to explain everything with actions. Jining seemed to be used to Suli's style of doing things. After feeding Suli porridge again, she left quietly. If she stayed here all the time, she would inevitably be discovered. Looking at the night outside, Suli's spiritual stone spread like mercury, and soon all the surrounding buildings appeared in her psychic awareness. This was a relatively remote woodshed, not far from Jining and her residence. But no one was assigned to it, so it had been empty. Suli didn't know how Jining found this place. There is still no pneuma of Wang Yu on the peak. Suli withdrew her psychic awareness and pondered. On that day, Wang Yu told them to get the mental method of Yenti realm by themselves and come back a few days later to check their progress. It was inappropriate to give such an order. On the surface, she and Jining were just ordinary girls who had just entered the sect and knew nothing about cultivation. As the saying went, the master leads the way, but the cultivation depends on the individual. But Wang Yu didn't even take the step of leading them in, which was too irresponsible. Although Dansha Mount is a little chaotic, the cultivation of those disciples is not bad. Wang Yu should not be such an irresponsible person. She should be delayed by something. Suli speculated, and the thought dissipated, it's good that no one disturbs me. When my injury recovers, I will take the girl to the book pavilion. Suli calmed down and concentrated on recovering her spiritual power. She still had many things to do. Although the ring of reincarnation mirror had a connection with her, the effect of shielding the nature's mystery was not enhanced. Somehow, the body of evil ghost gave her an intuition that when she broke through Zhuji realm, even if she hid in the mountain-protecting tactical matrix of Huajin sect, she would be in danger of being discovered by natural law. The tactical matrix of camouflage still needs to be prepared. Fortunately, it seems that Wang Yu will not come back in a short time, so I still have time. Thinking of this, the last trace of thinking in Suli's eyes faded away, and she completely entered the state of meditation. Only a trace of psychic awareness wandered outside and was alert to the outside world. Several days passed in the blink of an eye. In these days, Jining came several times intermittently and brought Suli a few bowls of spiritual rice porridge. The injury on Suli's hand had recovered a lot, so she didn't need Jining to feed her anymore. She saw that Jining wanted to say something to her several times, but she didn't ask. Tomorrow, I'll go to the library with you. Putting down the empty bowl, Suli suddenly said. She could naturally sense that more than 10 days had passed, but the girl still hadn't stepped into Yenti realm. It was time to solve the trick in the book pavilion. Jining was slightly stunned, and then her face changed slightly. She shook her head and said, "You can't go." "Why?" Suli frowned slightly, and Jining's heart tightened for no reason. It seemed that the consequences would be very serious if they disobeyed the will of the person in front of them. Dispelling the strange thoughts in her mind, Jining sighed helplessly and said sadly, "Junior sister, don't ask. Once you've recovered, we'll descend the mountain together. The immortal Tao is destined to have no fate with us." Suli raised her eyebrows slightly. Looking at the gray disciple uniform worn by Jining, she said nothing more. Jining thought that Suli had listened to her, so she didn't say much. She picked up the lunchbox and left the woodshed. Seeing that Jining's movements were no longer jerky, Suli felt strange. Jining didn't go to the book pavilion these days. What could she do? It was a silent night. In the early morning of the next day, Suli woke up from meditation. She could stretch her fingers freely, and her injury had almost recovered. Even if she fought with others, she would not be affected. It's time to solve some troubles. Murmuring in a low voice, Suli got up, put on the pink disciple uniform, and walked to the book pavilion. When the purple air came from the east, it was the best time to practice. All the pavilions above the mountainside of Donsha Mount were lifeless and immersed in practice. The guarding disciple of the book pavilion sensed the rising pneuma everywhere, and he was full of expectations. When his guarding task was over, he would take the reward from the first senior sister to practice well. At this moment, the guarding disciple suddenly saw a pink figure not far away. He stared at her. Wasn't Jining already? How dare she come? Su Li came closer. The guarding disciple saw her quite strange face, and then remembered that she was the other child with immortal latency who came with Jining on the first day. It was just that this girl's sense of existence was too low. If she didn't appear now, he would have forgotten that there was such a girl. The instructions of the first senior sister did include her. It was not easy to get rid of Jining, and it was just a few days of peace. Su Li glanced at the guarding disciple who looked a little unnatural. She stretched out her hand to hand out the token, and said lightly, "Can I go in?" The guarding disciple was suddenly stunned. Looking at Su Li, who looked a little cold, he couldn't help but wipe his eyes. Was this the same person as the weak girl who came last time? Senior fellow apprentice, Su Li reminded him. The guarding disciple suddenly shivered and returned the token to Su Li. When he was about to dispel her idea of receiving the mental method, he found that Su Li directly turned around and walked inside, without giving him a chance to speak. At the thought of the reward he was about to get, the guarding disciple's face suddenly became gloomy, and he said bitterly, "Little girl, you asked for it." He took out a carrier rune from his arms, sketched on it, and crushed it. When Su Li stepped into the gate of the book pavilion, a fresh and elegant ink fragrance immediately came to her face. Most of the carriers of precious mental methods in the cultivation circle were jade slips, and the contents could only be obtained by exploring with psychic awareness. Some less important cultural miscellaneous records, geographical records of the cultivation circle, and other popular knowledge were mostly in the form of book rubbings. The first floor of the book pavilion was mostly used as bookshelves instead of the matrix platform for placing jade slips. Su Li glanced around and immediately saw the elder of mental method on the first floor dozing off behind the counter. She went to the counter without saying anything, took out a blank rubbing, and knocked on the table. This knock was extremely exquisite. Su Li had secretly used the secret method of sound attack, but the elder of mental method on the first floor only had the cultivation of the fifth hurdle of Lianqi realm. Naturally, it was difficult for him to detect it. He just suddenly felt upset and wanted to do something. When he opened his eyes and saw Su Li holding the blank rubbing, he was suddenly stunned. Before he figured out the situation, he saw Su Li respectfully handed over the rubbing and said, "By the order of the Mount Head, I specially come to copy the rubbing of the mental method of Yunti realm. Elder, please give me the original copy." The elder of mental method of Yunti realm subconsciously handed over the original copy in a daze. When Su Li took it and began to copy, he suddenly woke up with a quiver. Oh, it was the child with immortal latency. "Stop!" The elder of mental method shouted and tried to grab the writing brush in Su Li's hand. Su Li's hand was empty. She raised her head and looked colder. "Elder, what can I do for you?" The elder of mental method saw that Su Li was not frightened at all, but there was a meaning of questioning in her words. He couldn't help but be speechless. He couldn't think of a reason to stop her for a while. He secretly cursed the 4 maids of Yulin. Who said that these 2 girls were cowards? How to explain the one in front of him? Su Li slightly raised her eyebrows and hid her fingers in her sleeves. She condensed a trace of spiritual power and quietly extended it to the edge of the tactical matrix to the upper stairs. The tactical matrix to protect the book pavilion was originally a submatrix of star-stacked tactical matrix. Su Li broke a small hole without any effort. After pretending that it was accidentally damaged, she then questioned, "Elder, could it be that you want to help me get a better brush? Or, you don't want to listen to the order of Mount Head at all and give me the mental method of Yundi realm. Seeing that Suli was not afraid at all at such a young age, the elder of mental method was embarrassed and immediately became angry. He crushed the writing brush in his hand into pieces, presumptuous. You are just a little handyman disciple. Who gave you the courage to offend me? Oh. Suli glanced at the eyes gathered around her and the tactical matrix of the second layer that had some movement. She sneered, you're so powerful. Courage. I think. Elder, you are more courageous. For your own selfish desire, you stop your disciple from copying the mental method. I also want to ask, who gave you the courage? Hearing this, the disciples who came to watch the fun suddenly changed their faces. They put down the books in their hands and hurried away. They couldn't afford to get involved in this vortex. Elder Shinfa was so angry that he almost fainted. He resisted the urge to slap Suli to death, pointed at her nose tip and scolded, nonsense. You know how to confuse people at such a young age. For the sake of Mount Head, you can be punished for the death penalty, but you can't escape punishment. I will let you know who has the final say in the book pavilion. After Elder Shinfa said this, he slapped Suli's delicate face with a palm as big as a cattail leaf fan. This slap must make Suli's skin bleed. The few disciples who dared to stay to watch the fun suddenly felt unbearable and turned their heads. Suli didn't dodge. She glanced at the hole in the tactical matrix whose fluctuations subsided, and there was a trace of coldness in her eyes. How did Hua Yen manage the sect in such a foul atmosphere? If Danxia Mount only had these people who fawned on the rich and were obsessed with power, then Danxia Mount didn't need it. Just when Suli was about to fight back and expose herself. Suddenly, a faint voice echoed in the awareness sea of Elder Shinfa. Who has the final say in the book pavilion? Elderly, you're really awe-inspiring as a mental cultivation elder. If even half a strand of hair on this girl's head is injured, you'll have to go to the Cold Wind Pagoda to reflect on your mistakes. As soon as Elder Shinfa heard the Cold Wind Tower, he stared with his eyes wide open. He forcibly withdrew his palm with his pneuma and blood flowing in the opposite direction, and almost spat out a mouthful of blood. What's going on? How can the first elder know what happened on the first floor? Elder Shinfa was full of horror. His next words and deeds would be noticed by the first elder. If he still persisted in doing things the wrong way, he must go to the Cold Wind Tower. Thinking of this, Elder Shinfa showed a kind smile. After a while, he was suddenly dumbfounded. It seemed that he didn't even know the name of this girl until now. Chapter 339. Hearing the footsteps, Elder Shinfa immediately thought of something, and his face changed. Before he could do anything, the 4 maids with silver tokens had stepped into the book pavilion. Seeing Suli holding the rubbing in her hand, the leading maid's face immediately darkened. She stepped forward and scolded, "Little bitch, you refuse a toast only to drink a forfeit." As she said, she was about to step forward and slap Suli. Elder Shinfa remembered the instructions of the first elder, and his eyes turned red. He grabbed the maid's arm and waved it hard. Clap! The crisp and loud applause resounded throughout the book pavilion, and the maid suddenly went crazy. "Li Zhonggue, are you tired of living? How dare you hit me?" She didn't understand why Li Zhonggue, who had always flattered her, would hit her. Didn't he want the reward from the master? Li Zhonggue smiled coldly. He was about to die, and he didn't care about the reward. As handyman disciples, you only have one chance to enter the book pavilion every month. If you want to enter again, you have to pay contribution points. But you just broke in recklessly and didn't pay attention to the rules of Danxia Mount at all. Do you think you deserve to be beaten? The maid was slightly stunned and looked at Li Zhonggue as if she was looking at a fool. Rules? Li Zhonggue, are you stupid after practicing too much? How dare you talk about rules with me? If you don't make it clear today, you will die when I go back and tell the master. Who is your master? Suli suddenly spoke, and everyone could not help but be slightly stunned. At this moment, she dared to interrupt. One of the other three maids seemed to be unable to hold back. She stood up and looked at Suli as if she was looking at a dead person, and said coldly, "Little sister, listen carefully. Our master is the next master of Danxia Mount, first senior sister apprentice Yulin. If you offend her, do you think you still have a way to live?" Suli was silent, and the maid immediately thought she was afraid, and laughed wantonly. Li Zhanggui's heart sank, and his eyes showed worry. Yulin was too powerful, and it was still unknown whether the first elder would be her enemy or not, but not long after, he received the sound transmission of the first elder again. After hearing the instructions, he immediately breathed a sigh of relief, and his face became tough again. "Guards! Chase these troublemaking maids out of the library pavilion. If you resist, kill without mercy." The maidservant fell into a complete daze upon hearing this, and her eyes were filled with disbelief. How could he, a mere chi-refining stage elder, dare to disobey the master's order? Shwa shwa shwa. Groups of law enforcement disciples with powerful auras rushed in. The four maids' faces paled and their bodies began to tremble. Apart from their backers, they were just maids at the peak of Yunti realm. Not to mention a team of law enforcement disciples, even one of them was enough to defeat them. Seeing that Suli was protected by Li Zhanggui, the head maid with a silver token showed deep hatred on her face. "Wicked girl, if you have the ability, you can stay in the book pavilion for a lifetime. Let's go." Suli narrowed her eyes slightly, and the dim light flowed in them. Li Zhanggui did not notice her change. After the four maids left, he finally had time to hand over the golden rubbing in his hand to Suli and explained, "This is a rubbing of Yunti realm personally copied by a genius of Danxia Mount. It has a better effect on practice. Take it back and send it back to the book pavilion after you understand its meaning." Suli took over the rather heavy rubbing, smiled slightly, and nodded, "Thank you, elder." Once she took action, in order to ensure that the details were not leaked, she must kill all the witnesses. As the real master of the star-stacked tactical matrix, it was not difficult for her to do this. It could be said that the person who secretly stopped Li Zhanggui not only saved the lives of everyone in the book pavilion, but also saved herself. "Don't be so polite." Li Zhanggui waved his hand and looked at Suli's calm face. He was surprised and doubtful in his heart. He did not know whether she was really calm or she did not understand the situation after today. If she annoyed the proud master, it was hard to guarantee that she would not do something out of line. However, this matter had been reported to the first elder, and Suli's life or death had nothing to do with him. Naturally, he would not be a good person to remind her. He just waved his hand to let Suli leave, and hurried to the top floor of the book pavilion. For maids with silver token returned to an extremely spacious and exquisitely decorated courtyard near the top of the mountain. The leading maid dismissed the three people behind her. She passed through several courtyard doors and came to the adytum located in the deepest part of the courtyard. She knelt down and cried, "Master, please forgive me. I screwed up." Before she finished her words, the door of the adytum rumbled open. Yulin, wearing a light green gauze dress, swayed out of the door and sat on the chair in the outer room. Her expression was indifferent but inviolable. The chief maid knelt on the ground and did not dare to breathe. As time passed, there were only Yulin's gentle tapping on the table and the maid's slightly heavy breathing in the room. Finally, at a moment when the maid could not bear it, Yulin opened her mouth with a high prestige. "Chun, what's the matter? Don't tell me that you can't even deal with a 15-year-old child." The maid's body tightened, and she quickly said, "Master, it's not Jining," but another girl suddenly launched an attack. I don't know why Li Zhanggui went crazy. He even invited the law enforcement team and drove us all out of the book pavilion. We couldn't stop it. That girl should have got the rubbing of Yunti realm. What? Yulin's eyes opened slightly, and the maid immediately lowered her head even more, wishing to stick to the ground. Yulin's eyes were indifferent, and she withdrew her gaze. Chun had been with her since she was a child for 10 years. She naturally would not doubt what Chun said. However, did Li Zhonggui dare to confront her? Yulin sneered. If there was no one behind him, then he was really tired of living. The secret realm of shattered spirits is about to open, and I am in need of cultivation resources. I don't know what the old thing Wang Yu is thinking. She even wants to give half of my resources to those 2 useless children with immortal latency. I can't tolerate any sand in my eyes. Chun knelt on the ground tremblingly, and did not dare to talk nonsense. She had heard her master disrespectful to the Mount Lord more than once, and she had long been used to it. Su Li's hateful and plain face appeared in her mind. She suddenly plucked up her courage and said, "Master, why bother? Since you don't want those 2 little maids to mess things up, why not?" Chun said, and made a gesture of cutting her neck. Yulin was slightly stunned, and raised her eyebrows. She said in surprise, "I didn't expect you to have such courage. This has crossed the bottom line. If I am found out, my position as the first disciple will come to an end." Chun thought she had said something wrong, and suddenly looked flustered. But Yulin waved her hand indifferently. The position of the first disciple is related to the quota of the secret realm of shattered spirits. Otherwise, who cares about this position? However, you have reminded me. As she spoke, Yuling flipped her palm and a jade talisman that glowed with spiritual light flew into Chun-Er's hand. Take this talisman and go to the market at the foot of the mountain to find someone. Tell him, it's about time. When you make your move, get rid of those 2 girls. Chun was shocked. She knew her master's plan very well. Was her master finally going to kill that senior fellow apprentice? It was like killing a chicken with a butcher's knife to kill a cow by asking that lord to kill Jining and Su Yu. A trace of pleasure appeared on Chun's face, and she sneered. Su Yu was doomed. Su Li returned to her original residence with the golden rubbing in her hands. She walked to the place where Jining lived next door. When she was about to knock on the door, she suddenly frowned and gently pushed the door open. There was no one inside, and Jin Ying's pneuma was very faint. That girl hadn't come back to live for at least 3 days. Was it because of her broken finger that she was also afraid and found another place to hide? Su Li frowned and turned to the woodshed where Jining had hidden her. The residences of handyman disciples on Danxia Mount were widely distributed. It was impossible for her to find them, so she could only wait for her in the woodshed. Approaching the woodshed, Su Li suddenly heard a faint cry. She immediately quickened her steps and pushed open the door of the woodshed. Suddenly, she saw Jining squatting on the edge of the bed, crying like a pear blossom in the rain. There was a meal box beside her, which contained hot spiritual rice porridge. Seeing that Su Li suddenly came back intact and stood in front of her, Jining was instantly stunned. Then an unspeakable grievance rose from the bottom of her heart. She directly got up and threw herself into Su Li's arms, wailing. "Woo! I thought you were dead. They all say Yu Chun-Er is a devil who kills without batting an eye. Woo! I thought I would never see you again, woo." Su Li didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Hearing the cry of the little girl, she gradually calmed down and gently patted her back. She really couldn't bear to hate this girl. After a while, Jining stopped crying. She blinked her red and swollen eyes and asked aloud, "Junior sister apprentice Su, where have you been?" "I thought." Before she finished her words, she saw Su Li take out the golden rubbing and put it in front of her, I brought the mental method of Yunti realm. Hearing this, Jean Ying's eyes suddenly widened, and she stammered and couldn't say a complete sentence. You didn't, Suli nodded and said with a smile, I went to the book pavilion. Jean Ying was confused, and immediately picked up the golden rubbing and was about to rush out of the door. Suli was confused, and Jean Ying suddenly stopped and said in a panic, Junior sister apprentice Sue, run away. If you are found stealing, you will definitely be beaten to death. She begged for 10 days, but Elder Xinfa didn't say anything and didn't copy it for her at all. Now Suli suddenly took out such an exquisite rubbing. She couldn't think of any other way except stealing. Suli couldn't help laughing and was about to explain. Suddenly, her face changed, and she looked up at the door over Jean Ying. Jean Ying looked back with some doubts. She was so scared that she trembled and retreated to Suli's side. Under the tree not far from the door, there stood a silent figure wrapped in a black robe. Chapter 340. The evening lights were dim, and the thin man in a black robe standing under the tree looked weird. Who are you? Jean Ying grasped Suli's lapel tightly and plucked up her courage to ask. Before she finished her words, the black robe wrapped around the man's face fell, revealing a slightly pale face. This face was so ordinary that no one would notice him if he stood in the crowd. After the black robe was taken off, a faint breath of nauseating blood spread from his body. The emerald green branches stained with this breath immediately showed a tendency to wither. Suli's eyes were slightly fixed. A blood practitioner, who had practiced to the 6th hurdle of Zhuji realm. How could there be such an evil practitioner in Huajian sect? Seeing those withered flowers and plants, Jean Ying was so scared that her face turned pale. She pulled Suli with a trembling voice, it's terrible. Let's run away. There is a window behind the house, Before Jean Ying finished her words, the man standing under the tree at the door suddenly blurred. He approached her in a few flashes and knocked her out with a palm. So noisy. I don't like noisy children. The man's voice was hoarse and unpleasant, like fingernails rubbing on a rusty copper surface. The room quieted down. The man turned his bloody eyes and looked at Suli, who was still calm. He said with interest, you don't seem to be afraid of me. Suli smiled slightly and said in a flat voice, what's there to be afraid of? The man was slightly stunned when he heard the words, and then the interest in his eyes became stronger. It's interesting. A mortal girl who has not yet entered Tao has no awe for cultivation. I have never seen such a thing. You are the first one. Originally, the one who sent me the message asked me to kill you 2 little girls directly. But now, I have changed my mind. Suli raised her eyebrows, what's the idea? The man laughed in a low voice and pointed to Jean Ying, who had fainted on the ground, kill her. As long as you kill her, I will accept you as a disciple and take you away from Huajian sect. I will even teach you all I know and make you as free as me. After that, he looked at Suli expectantly, almost foreseeing how excited and ecstatic she would become. It was her favorite thing to make people hope and then let them die in despair. However, the truth was clearly not progressing in the direction he had hoped for. Suli curled her lips slightly, and her calm eyes became sarcastic. You, a blood practitioner in Zhuji realm, dare to say that you are free and unfettered in the cultivation circle. As soon as the words came out, the man's face changed wildly. He finally realized the extraordinariness of Suli and subconsciously wanted to keep away from her. But at this time, he found that a white and delicate little hand had been put on his shoulder, and then, boom! An incomparably heavy force suddenly erupted, as if Mount Tai was pressing down on him. Half of the man's shoulder directly collapsed with a "kacha" sound, and all his internal organs were crushed. You! The man's eyes widened, and he spat out a mouthful of blood. He couldn't understand why Suli, who looked weak and harmless, had such terrifying strength, and her temperament was decisive and cold-blooded. She was more like an evil practitioner than him. "Spare me." Feeling that the huge force on his shoulder was getting heavier and heavier, the man said with difficulty. He didn't think about anything now, and only hoped to survive in the hands of Suli. Suli narrowed her eyes slightly, and suddenly smiled. "Okay." The man looked happy. Suli raised her left hand, and under his horrified expression, she slapped on the top of his head. "Ah! You said." The man's eyes were bloodshot. After squeezing out the 4 words, his head drooped down, and he could no longer speak. Suli slowly withdrew her hand, and muttered to herself, "I have seen your eyes many times. But I don't have the habit of explaining to living people." Glancing at Jining, who was still in a coma, Suli waved her hand to close the wooden door, and returned to the bed with Jining in her arms. She reached out and hit Jining's Haitian acupoint to make her sleep deeper. After doing these, Suli returned to the man's corpse, took off the universe bag from his waist, and was lost in thought. Although it was the first time that she killed someone since reincarnation, her memory was still there, and she had long been numb to life and death. Looking at the bloody corpse in front of her, her heart didn't fluctuate at all. "My cultivation has not recovered to Juji realm, so I can't use the soul-searching skill. However, I can also guess that the first disciple, Yulin, is behind this person, so I don't need to waste my energy." Thinking of this, Suli frowned. How should she deal with this person's corpse? If it was an ordinary practitioner, she could burn it with fire, but he was a blood practitioner, who had reached Juji realm. He had swallowed at least tens of thousands of people's blood essence, so his blood and energy were so strong that they didn't disperse. After his death, the blood and energy would evaporate, and even the universe bag couldn't stop it. It might even become poisonous blood and contaminate the entire Danxia Mount. If she burned it with fire, the blood and energy would only evaporate faster. She didn't want to be exposed now, and she couldn't let the only corpse ruin her plan. Looking at the dark night sky outside, Suli shook the black robe and wrapped the corpse. She lifted it with one hand and was about to push the door open to find a remote place to deal with it. But at this moment, a rainbow flashed in the sky and fell into the hall on the top of Danxia Mount. Suli immediately stopped, and looked slightly serious. Wang Yu was back. If she went out to deal with the corpse of the blood practitioner at this moment, the movement would definitely be noticed by Wang Yu. She must find another way. Perhaps sensing Suli's thoughts, Black Lotus Ring suddenly emerged on its own and rotated slowly. This time, instead of sending any useful information to Suli, it sent a suction force to the corpse wrapped in black cloth. Suli was slightly stunned, and sensed that Black Lotus Ring seemed to be asking for her opinion. "Can you deal with this corpse?" Suli frowned and sent out an idea. Black Lotus Ring rotated more cheerfully, and the suction force also increased. Obviously, it acquiesced to Suli's words. "Well, let me see how you are going to solve it." Suli loosened her palm, and the black cloth immediately fell down, revealing the corpse. Black Lotus Ring could do whatever it wanted. Almost instantly, the suction force of Black Lotus Ring increased countless times, but it only acted on the corpse, and Suli was not affected. Then Suli saw that the man's body seemed to be shattered by a huge force, and turned into a thick purple blood mist, which was all absorbed by Black Lotus Ring. After a few breaths, there was only a pile of white powder left on the ground, and Suli waved her hand to disperse it. Except for the black robe, there was nothing to prove that the blood practitioner had ever existed. Suli was surprised by the means of Black Lotus Ring, and suddenly her ring finger was hot. When she looked down, she saw that the originally dark Black Lotus Ring had become blood red at the moment, and a tear-shaped blood red crystal was slowly growing in the center of the lotus mark. When the blood-red crystal grew to the size of a fist, the heat of Black Lotus ring faded. Suli took off the blood-red crystal in surprise and doubt, and looked at it carefully. I have never seen such pure blood essence that is condensed to the extreme. How powerful will it be if it is refined into forging blood elixir? Suli's eyes were shining. Under the quenching of the starlight of reincarnation mirror, her physical strength in this life was far greater than that of the same period in her previous life. Although her cultivation was still in Lianqi realm at the moment, she was not worse than any monster at the peak of Zhuji realm in terms of strength and physical body. My physical body has been promoted to the bottleneck. It is not difficult to refine forging blood elixir, and the auxiliary medicine is simple and easy to get. Only the blood-melting grass is difficult to find. When my cultivation is restored, I can leave Huajian sect to find it. Thinking of this, Suli also put the black robe on the ground into the universe bag, cleaned the cabin, and then returned to her previous residence with Jining. Seeing that Jining would not wake up in a short time, Suli sat on the edge of her bed, took out the universe bag she got before, and explored it with her psychic awareness. A small space of less than 10 square meters appeared in her awareness sea. The man was obviously a casual practitioner. The things in the space were piled up in a corner in 2s and 3s. Suli glanced at them. Except for 500 low-grade spiritual stones and a dozen middle-grade spiritual stones, she did not find any particularly valuable treasures. Most of them were refined blood. As soon as Suli touched them, she knew that they were all the blood of babies, which was harmful to nature. She frowned slightly and shook her head with a wry smile. Compared to what she had done in the illusory realm, this was nothing. Although everything in the illusory realm was fake, her memories were not fake. The righteous ideals that she had always adhered to had long been completely destroyed in the illusory realm. The only thing that was left was her conscience as a human. Suli took out all the blood and burned them one by one. After chanting the sutra to eliminate the resentment, most of the things in the universe bag were empty. There were only some inferior healing elixirs left. Suli lost interest after a glance at them. As long as there were herbs, she could refine them at will. Seeing that it was almost dawn, Suli's psychic awareness was about to withdraw from the universe bag to practice for a while. Her eyes inadvertently glanced at her wrist, and the psychic awareness that was about to withdraw stopped immediately. The ring of reincarnation mirror was trembling. However, the trembling was too small. If she hadn't taken a look, she wouldn't have noticed it at all. Is there something in the universe bag that caused it to react? Suli hesitated for a moment, took off the mirror ring, and slowly stuck it on the universe bag. In her previous life, reincarnation mirror was the oldest treasure in the world. Not to mention the universe bag, even the more advanced universe ring couldn't contain it. But now, Suli only saw a flash of light, and the mirror ring disappeared instantly and appeared in the spiritual stones that she had not yet withdrawn from the universe bag. It's so weak. What happened 1,000 years ago? Suli narrowed her eyes slightly. Before she could think about it, there was a new change in the universe bag. In the universe bag, the ring of reincarnation mirror floated in the nothingness and trembled slightly. Wisps of dust were drawn from the pile of debris and injected into it. This dust, Suli's psychic awareness intercepted a section and observed it carefully. But it was just ordinary dust. Why could the ring of reincarnation mirror absorb it? Could it be? Suli thought for a moment and had a guess. Chapter 341. Boz. The mirror ring exuded a wave of vitality from inside to outside, as if it had a life at this moment. It kept rotating in the nothingness, gradually fading the rust on the surface, and became silver again. But before the rust faded to 40%, the reincarnation mirror stopped. It seemed that it had exhausted its energy and fell on the ground of the universe bag, making a sweet and crisp sound. Suli activated her divine awareness. With a flash of white light, the mirror ring reappeared in her hand. The feeling of blood connection was condensed and did not fade away because of the change. She gently rubbed the bright side with her palm, and her eyes couldn't help narrowing slightly. The mirror ring on this side became a little thicker. Was that powder really a part of the reincarnation mirror? The reincarnation mirror is indestructible. Not to mention practitioners of Jindan realm, even the Grand Elder of Yushu's sect who had reached Yuanying realm couldn't hurt it. But now it is broken into powder. The figure of the old beggar flashed in front of Suli. This person's cultivation was more terrifying than she imagined. At least he had reached the legendary Huashan realm, which had condensed the primordial spirit. Qi Xianqing, who could talk with him on an equal footing, was not bad. In the cultivation circle, he could be called a mighty, and any one of them was a big shot at the level of the old ancestor of a sect. When she was in the place of the Huashan realm, she reached the supernatural realm, which was nothing compared with the real world and Jindan realm. A game of chess between almighty beings is too far away for me. Suli breathed a sigh of relief and temporarily suppressed the chaotic thoughts at the bottom of her heart. She evoked a trace of black spiritual power and injected it into the ring of the reincarnation mirror. In less than a breath, the breath of spiritual power was completely suppressed by the mirror ring. Seeing this, Suli relaxed her eyebrows. Anyway, the mirror ring's ability to shield nature's mystery has been enhanced. At least in Lianqi realm, I don't need to worry about shielding nature's mystery. For me, it's a good thing. Next, I don't need to rush to practice. I should first make up the pneuma and blood lost by the ring of reincarnation mirror. At this time, a painful moan awakened Suli from her contemplation. She looked up and saw Jining frowning and opening her eyes. Jining was at a loss for a moment. She remembered what happened before she fainted, and suddenly woke up completely. She sat up and grasped Suli's hand tightly. She was about to speak, but Suli spoke first. Why are you sweating so much? Did you have a nightmare? Jining was slightly stunned. She saw the furnishings around her. Wasn't this her own room? If he wasn't in the woodshed, could it really be a dream? She felt a little confused. She touched her aching forehead and tried to remember what happened before. She clearly remembered that she was in the woodshed. Could it be that she had been dreaming all day? Seeing that she was still suspicious, Suli couldn't help but smile and said, "When I came back, I found that you fell in the woodshed. I don't know how you passed out. The bed in the woodshed is too hard. I was afraid that you couldn't sleep well, so I carried you back." Jining suddenly understood. She had some impression of this memory. Fainting. Could it be that she fainted from crying? She blushed slightly. After believing junior sister Sue's words, she immediately felt a little embarrassed. Fortunately, junior sister Sue didn't ask her how she fainted. This is the mental method of Yunti realm that I got from the elder of the book pavilion. I have already read it. You should also take a good look at it. It's late at night, and I have to go back to rest. Let's talk about it tomorrow. Suli took out the golden rubbing, put it on Jinying's bedside, and turned away. Although there were still some loopholes under her cover, it was the best she could do now. As for the rest, she could wait until she reached Juji realm, and then erase Jinying's memory. Jining stared at the golden rubbing blankly. She slowly picked it up and touched the cover. The familiar touch still remained in her mind. She had seen this thing in her dream. She had never seen a dream that was more real than the one she had today. Was the conversation in the woodshed and the mysterious and terrifying black-robed man really a dream as junior sister Sue said? Or, were they all true? Jining was more confused, and then a strong curiosity arose in her mind. If it wasn't a dream, how did Suli escape with her? Unfortunately, the black-robed man had turned into dust. As long as Suli didn't say it, she was doomed to not get the answer. It was a silent night. In the early morning of the next day, the roar of the spirit beasts sounded in the mountains. Suli opened her eyes and waved her hand to open the door, letting the morning light shine in. Her delicate cheeks were as delicate as pink snow, which made people unable to put them down. Suli touched the lotus mark at the corner of her eyes, and her eyes flickered. Last night, the starlight guided by the reincarnation mirror increased by more than 30%. She could sense that her physical body had a considerable improvement. If her physical body directly broke through to Jindan realm, her perception was still there. What she needed to do to restore Jindan realm was only a huge amount of spiritual power. I don't know whether the secret realm of shattered spirits of Yushu sect still exists. After thousands of years of accumulation, the innate spirit lake of that secluded place should have recovered a lot. If I can go there, while thinking about it, Suli suddenly noticed something. All the expressions on her face quickly disappeared, and she became well-behaved. Soon after she put on the gray linen clothes and covered the ring of the reincarnation mirror, a rainbow light flew from the sky and landed in front of the wooden house in the blink of an eye. Jining, who heard the movement, quickly climbed out of the back window of the wooden house and jumped into Suli's room. She immediately saw Suli also hiding at the door. Although there was not much expression on her face, it could still be seen that she was afraid. Jining was slightly surprised. Today's junior sister apprentice Su seemed to be a little different. After the rainbow light dissipated, Wang Yu scanned with her divine awareness and saw Jining's movement. She couldn't help but be slightly stunned. But when she saw Su Li's hands were wrapped in white cloth, and there were faint dry black blood spots, her face immediately sank. What happened in the peak after she left? Thinking about it, she stepped forward, cleared her throat, and said in a low voice, "Open the door, two girls. I'm back." Hearing this long-lost female voice, Jining was surprised. She didn't have time to wonder about Su Li's reaction, and immediately went to open the door bolt. Looking at the slim woman in red in front of the door, tears quickly gathered in her eyes. She couldn't care about anything, and suddenly threw herself into Wang Yu's arms. "Master, you're finally back, woo-woo." Wang Yu frowned, but soon relaxed. She didn't push Jining away, but gently patted her on the back, and said in a slightly gentle voice, "Tell me, what have you been doing these days? Why didn't you practice?" With her cultivation, she could naturally see that Jining and Suli were still just mortals, and they hadn't even reached the first hurdle of Yunti realm, which was very abnormal. Glancing at Suli, who was still hiding far away, she sighed softly. It seemed that Siyu had been hurt more, and even became wary of her. "I managed to grab these two girls from Yuan Shu. Their cultivation talents can rank second and third among the disciples of this session. I'd like to see who is playing tricks." Seeing that Wang Yu was going to support them, Jin Ying's eyes suddenly brightened, and she intermittently told what had happened these days. "On the second day when my junior sister apprentice and I went up the mountain, we wanted to get the mental method according to your instructions, but we encountered difficulties from the gatekeeper disciples and elders, and we couldn't get the mental method." "The elder guarding the pavilion didn't give you the mental method?" Wang Yu almost thought that she had heard it wrong, and she was astonished. At this moment, Jining continued, "I cried and begged for 10 days, but I couldn't get it. Every time, I would encounter 4 sisters with silver tokens who made things difficult for me. They robbed my clothes and asked me to change into gray clothes to help in the dining room. They also said, if I went to the book pavilion again, would be in danger. By the way, junior sister apprentice Su has been recuperating since her finger was injured. Yesterday, she went to the book pavilion, and stole the mental method of Yunti realm. Master, please don't blame her. She was possessed at that time." She is definitely not a thief. As Jining said, she took out the rubbing and presented it with both hands. Wang Yu took the booklet with a gloomy face, and her heart was already full of anger. Of the two boys she had personally accepted, one was forced to go to the spiritual dining room, and the other had all 10 fingers broken and was seriously injured. Who on earth dared to meddle in Danxia Mount? Was he tired of living? Taking a deep breath, Wang Yu forcibly suppressed her anger. After comforting Jining with a gentle expression, her eyes fell on Su Li. "Little Su, come here, too." Su Li was shocked. The ring of reincarnation mirror ran to the extreme, and the secret methods of Black Lotus she ran was hidden in the deepest pubic region. On the surface, she showed hesitation, and moved over after a few seconds. Seeing Su Li approaching, Wang Yu looked slightly relaxed, and then gently lifted Su Li's hands wrapped in thick white cloth, and slowly uncovered them. As layers of white cloth with blood fell, Wang Yu's face became more and more ugly. When the last layer was uncovered, she had a feeling of not knowing where to start. The last layer of white cloth had been dyed black and brown, and it was glued to the wound on the hand. If it was torn forcibly, it would tear the wound again. "You're insane. How is it different from the evil circle to treat a little child like this?" Looking at Su Li, who looked gloomy but still didn't cry, Wang Yu's eyes were slightly sour, and her heart was full of tenderness. Her firm voice sounded sonorous. "I will help you get back all the grievances and injuries you have suffered." 3 days later, in the side hall at the top of Danxia Mount, Yunxia Hall, Su Li sat cross-legged on the exquisite silk bed, looking at the intact hands in front of her, and showed a thoughtful look. In the past 3 days, she and Jining had been living in Yunxia Hall, and with the help of medical practitioners, their injuries were all recovered. Wang Yu really fulfilled her promise, and all the disciples of the book pavilion related to this matter, such as Li Zhonggui, were sent to Hanfeng Tower, and the 4 maids who bullied Jining were thrown out of Danxia Mount with broken limbs. Such a big event happened, and Danxia Mount was suddenly in a state of panic, and even bullying among handyman disciples rarely happened. Su Li was very satisfied with this result, at least on the surface. As for Jining, she was naturally very happy these days, and quickly came out of the previous shadow. Fan Zisong, the inherited disciple who was responsible for teaching the two, looked at them, and couldn't help but nod slightly. The task assigned by the master was finally completed, and the 2 junior sisters had reached the first hurdle of Yundi realm. At this time, a red light flashed over the palace. "Master is back." Chapter 342. Greetings, Master. In the main hall, Fan Zisong stepped forward quickly. His thin and handsome face showed respect, and he bowed his head slightly to salute. Wang Yu looked indifferent and nodded gently. She had been cultivating for thousands of years, and her mind was as deep as the sea. Naturally, she would not easily show her inner emotions on her face. "How is the task I gave you?" In order to compensate Ing and Su Li, she specially woke up her most promising disciple from practice and asked him to teach her personally. Fan Zisong straightened up and replied in a neither servile nor overbearing manner, "Master, both junior sister apprentices have good talents and reached Yundi realm within 3 days." Wang Yu looked satisfied. "According to your observation, how are the temperaments of these 2 girls?" Fan Zisong paused and analyzed bluntly. "Junior sister apprentice Jining is simple and ignorant, so there is nothing to say. The key is junior sister apprentice Su Yu." "Oh." Wang Yu raised her eyebrows. "What's wrong with that girl?" "Junior sister apprentice Su Yu talks very little." Fan Zisong recalled Su Li's performance in the past 2 days and said aloud, "Most of the time, she stays alone and is very unsociable. When Jining was cultivating, she asked me a lot of questions, but that girl didn't ask anything, and her cultivation progress was not bad at all. In terms of intelligence, junior sister Su is obviously better, but if you want her to be loyal to Master, I am afraid it will be a little difficult. Wang Yu thought of the scene of meeting with Su Li 3 days ago and couldn't help but nod. Indeed, that girl is born like this. She didn't do it on purpose, so it's not appropriate to force her to change her character. However, judging from her performance in the days when I left, she is not a cold person, but quite affectionate. You don't have to worry too much. Yes, Master. Fan Zisong responded, and then looked hesitant. Master, Yulin. Wang Yu looked slightly cold and snorted. She was accepted by the old guy of Zihan's sect. Does she really think she is a big shot? Even if those 2 girls are only my nominal disciples, they're not people she can touch. For the sake of Zihan's sect, I won't do anything to her for the time being. After the secret realm of shattered spirits, you'll be the winner. Then, I'll see if she has any reason to continue to encroach on my Danxia mount. With that, Wang Yu's eyes fell on Fan Zisong, who looked respectful, and the lines on her face softened. Zisong, you are the first personal disciple I have accepted since I stepped into the cultivation world. Outsiders think that you are my servant, but you have been dormant for many years. Even I feel inferior to you in terms of accumulation. The selection of the secret realm of shattered spirits this time is your chance to soar to the sky. Fan Zisong's eyes, which had always been gentle, suddenly burst out a breathtaking light. He said firmly, I will live up to your expectations this time and make Danxia Mount famous. His target was not only Yulin. He, who had some adventures, had set his eyes on the genius with sword physique who walked out of Huajian's sect a long time ago. Back then, that person killed many people in the secret realm of shattered spirits and got the biggest benefit. If he couldn't do it, wouldn't he be letting down the inheritance he had encountered back then? Wang Yu laughed loudly. Okay. I'll see your performance. The selection of the secret realm of shattered spirits is coming. Teaching Jining and the other 2 girls is just incidental. Don't delay your own practice. Fan Zisong showed a gentle smile and nodded. I understand. I have been practicing in isolation for many years, and I have reached the limit of improvement. It's good for me to adjust my state during this period. It's good that you can think so. I'm going to practice. You can leave now. Excuse me, Master. After Fan Zisong left, the smile on Wang Yu's face faded, and she looked gloomy. Obviously, Yulin's matter was not as easy as she said. Zihan's sect was such a giant. As long as an elder of Naiman branch in Yuanying realm came, Huajian's sect would have a hard time. Before the headmaster started the closed-door training, he had told her not to fall out with Zihan's sect unless it was absolutely necessary. Yulin did have the capital to be arrogant, but she secretly embezzled other disciples' cultivation resources before. Now she even became worse and bullied her. Did she really think she was a soft-footed shrimp? She didn't get the title of Fairy Huiyun for nothing. The selection of the secret realm of shattered spirits. Yu Longshan, I'd like to see if you dare to violate the Zhuzhou covenant to fight me if your granddaughter dies on the arena. On the other side, Fan Zisong returned to Yunxia Hall and saw Jining playing with the maid. He couldn't help but shake his head and smile. When he was her age, he was still wandering and begging in the secular world. If his master hadn't brought him back, he would have died on the street. Now hundreds of years had passed, but those miserable experiences seemed to be yesterday. Turning his gaze, he saw Su Li sitting at the table and seemed to be in a daze. With more interest in his eyes, he walked over. Seeing him approaching, Su Li frowned. Others thought she was in a daze, but she was actually practicing. Her state of mind was far beyond her cultivation, so she could absorb the spiritual power without meditating. Although the efficiency was half lower than meditating, the advantage was concealment. As long as he didn't appear within 30 meters around her, she wouldn't feel the fluctuation of the spiritual power. But now, Seeing that Fan Zisong had stepped over the boundary of 30 meters, she had to stop practicing and hide the mental method in the deepest part of her body. Junior Sister Apprentice Su, what are you doing? Fan Zisong asked softly with a jade-like gentle smile on his face. Su Li glanced at him and didn't speak. Then she bowed her head in silence. A trace of embarrassment flashed in Fan Zisong's eyes, but he didn't get angry. Instead, he began to talk about his past experience. His master didn't have many disciples in her life, and all of them were dead except for him. He finally had 2 junior sisters, so he was very concerned about them. Su Li listened with her head down. She couldn't do anything except listen. It could be seen that this person tried to soften her wariness, which was somewhat similar to Tan Tai Yu in the illusion. But she didn't know whether this person did it from his heart or Wang Yu's order. 2 hours passed in the blink of an eye. Fan Zisong looked at Su Li, who was still stubborn, and couldn't help but feel helpless. He told so many miserable experiences in those years. If it were Jining, she would have burst into tears, but her expression didn't change at all. Could it be that her experience was more bitter than his? It seems that it is necessary to know the past of my junior sister apprentice. Thinking of this, Fan Zisong chatted with Su Li for a while and turned away. Looking at his back, Su Li's eyes were slightly gloomy, and she quietly withdrew her psychic awareness. Her realm of soul was much higher than Fan Zisong's, so she didn't attract his attention when she explored just now. This person's foundation is solid, and there seems to be an extremely terrible power hidden in his body. Even I feel a little scared when I explore it. If he was in Yushu's sect in those years, even if he didn't burst out that power, he would almost reach the level of the top 3 disciples of Naiman branch. But, why is his name not famous in Danxia Mount at all? Is it possible that Yulin has a higher talent? With a hint of doubt in her heart, Su Li glanced at Jining, who was still playing. Her desire to explore faded away, and she continued to be silent. The top of the mountain was the place where the spiritual power of the entire Danxia Mount gathered. The concentration of the spiritual power was more than 10 times higher than where Su Li stayed before. For 5 days, Su Li didn't sleep or rest, and finally pushed her cultivation to the peak of the 8th hurdle of Lianqi realm. When she was about to break through to the 9th hurdle, she suddenly sensed an extremely unstable pneuma bursting out of the main hole. What happened? Wang Yu can't even control her own pneuma. Su Li looked slightly serious. Jining, who was sitting aside and also working hard to practice, couldn't help but look over and asked curiously, "Junior sister apprentice, what are you looking at?" Su Li withdrew her gaze and shook her head, "Nothing. Continue to practice." Jining didn't know why, and she naturally couldn't sense anything. She had to continue to work hard to find the opportunity to meditate according to Su Li's words. Senior fellow apprentice Fan said that as long as she could enter the meditative state, the speed of practice would become extremely fast. At this moment, in the main hall, Wang Yu crushed the jade rune in her hand, and there was still some horror on her face. "I've only been back for a few days, and the situation has become so serious." Li Guang, the head of Fujian Mount, who was also in the hall, also looked solemn and said in a deep voice, "We don't have much time. Before the headmaster comes out of practice, we must not let Su Zini succeed. Without further ado, let's rush to the place of the accident immediately and snatch the thing back before Su Zini." Wang Yu's temperament was also decisive. She immediately nodded and said, "Senior fellow apprentice, go back and prepare. We'll set off immediately." Li Guang breathed a sigh of relief and turned to leave. Wang Yu was the most powerful one among the 3 mount heads, and it would be great if she could go to help. But before he flew away, he was stopped by Wang Yu again. He turned back and looked puzzled. Wang Yu looked a little pale and said, "Senior fellow apprentice, please find your disciple, Han Feng, and ask him to give me the positioning compass to find the child with immortal latency. Li Guang was stunned, and then he realized that what happened in Danxia Mount in the past 2 days had almost spread to the whole sect. Of course, he had heard about it. Junior sister apprentice is worried about the 2 little girls. Don't worry, I'll call Han Feng. Wang Yu looked grateful and sighed, thank you, senior fellow apprentice. If the first elder could leave the book pavilion, I wouldn't be so passive. Alas, Li Guang smiled slightly and said, Junior sister apprentice, don't be discouraged. All the difficulties are only temporary. As long as the headmaster successfully breaks through to the late stage of Yuanning realm, Zihan's sect will spit out all the things that we have taken from Huajian's sect these years. Well. Wang Yu was refreshed, and then couldn't help but feel pity, but, poor 2 little girls, they have just stepped into Yundi realm. After going to the secular world, they are destined to waste some time. Li Guang nodded helplessly. If Yang Chuanboy hadn't been taken to the forbidden area of the back mountain by the headmaster who had temporarily finished practice, he would probably be worried about it. Chapter 343. A moment later, Suli saw 2 rainbow lights, one red and one green, fly away from the top of the mountain. As she stared at them, Fan Zisang's figure appeared at the door of Yunxia Hall. He stepped into the hall quickly, with an imperceptible solemnity on his gentle face. He smiled at Su Li and Ji Ning, junior sister apprentices. You have been in the sect for more than half a month. Do you want to go back to your hometown? Ji Ning's big bright eyes immediately lit up, and she nodded repeatedly. I miss my mother. Senior fellow apprentice, can we really go down the mountain to visit her? In the past few days, the maids around her instilled a lot of common sense in the cultivation circle to her. She also knew that after ordinary children with immortal latency went up the mountain, they could only go down the mountain after their cultivation had been successful. It was against the rules for them to go down the mountain after less than half a month. Fan Zisang nodded with a smile. I'll go with you this time. Don't be afraid. Great. Ji Ning was so happy that she almost jumped up. She was really simple. Fan Zisang's care for her these days had already made her feel dependent on him. Looking at Ji Ning's bright smile, Fan Zisang felt relaxed for a moment. He turned to Su Li, who had not spoken. What do you think, junior sister apprentice? Su Li's eyes flickered slightly. As soon as Fan Zisang spoke, she had already understood Wang Yu's good intentions. She immediately nodded gently. It's up to you, senior fellow apprentice. Hearing Su Li's all-purpose answer, Fan Zisang was very helpless. After half a month of contact, he gradually got used to her cold temperament and continued, I've seen the positioning compass. Your hometown is much closer than your Jining dynasty. Let's go to Tieha village first, and then set off. The two responded together. Fan Zisang didn't give Su Li and Jining time to prepare, and directly took them away from the sect. It was no more than 10 minutes after Wang Yu left. When Yulin got the news, the hall on the top of Danxia Mount was already empty. Standing in front of the hall, she took a deep breath and sneered. Fan Zisang, don't think that I don't know that you are the direct disciple of Wang Yu, the bitch. But, how can you compare with my strength and foundation? In the selection of the secret realm of shattered spirits, I will let everyone know that you are not qualified to carry my shoes with your insignificant cultivation. With a heavy snort, Yulin's phoenix eyes were fierce. She casually threw out a stripe and smashed the delicately carved rockery into stone powder. Only then did she feel a little better. She floated away in the eyes of many Chor's disciples who were as silent as cicadas in winter. Fan Zisang drove the flying magic weapon and took Su Li and Ji Ning all the way to the desolate place. Ji Ning sat beside Su Li and touched the cloud magic weapon under her from time to time. There was a strong yearning and curiosity in her eyes. Fan Zisong found it interesting and couldn't help but explain, this magic weapon is called Feiyun, which is a unique flying magic weapon of Huajian sect. It is divided into 2 grades. Practitioners in Juji realm can travel 3,000 miles a day by driving the low-grade Feiyun, while masters can travel 6,000 miles a day by driving the high-grade Feiyun. Wow, so powerful! Jin Ying's eyes were sparkling. It was rare to see a precious horse that could travel thousands of miles a day in the secular world. She didn't expect that in the cultivation circle, a flying magic weapon could kill it in seconds. Su Li listened with little expression, but a faint trace of memory flashed in her eyes. Feiyun, Huayan's talent was not so good, but her state of mind was really extraordinary. She started cultivation with flowers. After stepping into Jindan realm, her cultivation speed was no less than that of Su Li, who had a heavenly spiritual root. She still remembered that when they met, Huayan once said that she would cultivate a unique spiritual cotton. The fruit was a natural flying magic weapon, which could be used with a little bit. In this way, she could save a lot of money to buy flying swords for her disciples, and she could even sell it to the public. At that time, Huayan asked her to give the spiritual cotton a name, and she just said Feiyun casually. Unexpectedly, after 1,000 years, Huayan not only successfully cultivated this kind of spiritual cotton, but also really named it Feiyun. A cultivator's feelings were very thin. Although she and Huayan were like-minded in the past, time could change everything. She couldn't be sure if the current Huayan was still the same as before. She couldn't be sure if the current Huayan would look down on her or even betray her because of her cultivation. Therefore, even if she knew that Huayan was practicing in isolation in the forbidden area of the back mountain, she never thought of going to see her. However, when she heard the word Feiyun, she was a little touched. Maybe, everything is not as bad as I think. Turning her head, Su Li looked at the clouds falling behind her, and the figure of a female practitioner in Taoist robe with outstanding temperament slowly appeared in front of her. Master, are you all right? A day and a night passed in the blink of an eye. Under the tireless urging of Fan Zisong, the 3 of them finally saw the outline of Tieha village the next evening. Jining looked at the small village with smoke below and blinked her eyes. Was this the hometown of Junior Sister Apprentice? Junior Sister Apprentice's talent was better than her. She didn't expect that she was born in a backward mountain village, which was very different from what she imagined. Fan Zisong took out the positioning compass and compared it. He nodded and said, "Here we are. Let's go down first." As he said, Feiyun accelerated and swooped down. After the experience last time, the villagers of Tieha village obviously had some understanding of cultivation. When a villager saw Feiyun, he immediately shouted, "Here they are. The immortals are coming again." What? The immortals are coming again. The old village head was slightly happy when he heard the shout. He quickly picked up his crutch and was about to go out, but a figure was faster than him. It was Li Yuehuan who had failed before. I must be selected this time. Even Su Li can go to the immortal gate. How can I be worse than her? Li Yuehuan stared at the gradually falling clouds in the sky. The ferociousness in her eyes made old Li quite frightened. He sighed secretly and followed her with his crutch. Since the immortal came last time, this child seemed to be possessed by the devil. She didn't do any work and dreamed of going to the immortal gate to become an immortal all day long. If she failed again this time, he really didn't know what she would become. Junior Sister Apprentice, is that your home? Fan Zisong pointed to a low earthen house. After the latter nodded, he landed without hesitation. He was also immortal, so he didn't mind it much. Huang was collecting sweet potatoes in the field. Although he heard the villagers' shouts, he was alone now and didn't want to join in the fun. But when he looked up, he saw a cloud fall at the door of his home. He couldn't help but be stunned. Soon after, he saw the clouds disperse, and two beautiful girls and a young man who was as gentle as jade appeared. "Li!" Huang exclaimed. Without saying anything, he put down the hoe and ran home. A touch of worry appeared on his face. Shouldn't Li be practicing in the sect at this time? How could she be sent back? Li Yuehuan, who ran the fastest, also saw Su Li. Her expression suddenly froze, and then she saw the indifferent young man who was more perfect than the last time. She couldn't help but be overjoyed. Su Li must have made a mistake and was expelled from the sect. Her chance came. With that in mind, she ran even faster as if there was wind beneath her feet. Seeing all the villagers of Tieha village gathered, Fan Zisong looked indifferent. When he was promoted to the inherited disciple, he also came out to collect children with immortal latency, so he was no stranger to this scene. When he saw Li Yuehuan, who was the first to arrive, panting, and seemed to have the joy of reuniting with his little junior sister on her face, he couldn't help but smile at Li Yuehuan. Li Yuehuan was immediately flattered. Regardless of other villagers coming behind her, she directly knelt down with a plop and said loudly, "I'm Li Yuehuan. Please take me into the mountain to practice and step into the path of cultivation." Seeing Li Yuehuan had knelt down, many children in the village who came later were so angry that their faces turned green. Why were they one step slower and let Li Yuehuan take the lead? Fan Zisong was slightly stunned, and then he realized that it was not because of reunion with Su Li, but because they mistakenly regarded him as an inherited disciple who came to collect children with immortal latency. He was about to explain, but Li Yuehuan, who couldn't help pointing at Su Li first, said, "Su Li, she has been a jinx since she was a child. She doesn't like to talk and is clumsy. She is not suitable to stay in the immortal sect. She deserves to be expelled from the immortal sect for offending you. Since you sent Su Li back, there is no position for you. It's better to accept my daughter, who will do better than Su Li." Fan Zisong listened to Li Yuehuan's words and laughed instead of being angry. He didn't need to argue with a child who was hundreds of years younger than him, but Li Yuehuan obviously had some conflicts with his junior sister apprentice. He was worried that he couldn't have a close relationship with his junior sister apprentice. However, what was the matter with the name Su Li? There was a slight doubt in his heart, but he also knew that it was not the time to ask questions. He just put it in his heart and didn't show it. Seeing the smile on Fan Zisong's face, Li Yuehuan immediately confirmed that she was right. She forcibly suppressed the ecstasy in her heart and was about to continue to say bad things about Su Li, but Huang rushed to kneel in front of Fan Zisong. "Immortal, please forgive me. If Su Li is disrespectful to you, it's because I didn't teach her well. She is still young. Immortal, please don't argue with Su Li." Then, Huang was about to kowtow. Seeing Su Li frowning, Fan Zisong immediately waved his hand to stop Huang. Seeing that he couldn't kneel, Huang couldn't help but be more frightened. Did Su Li really make a big mistake and the immortal refuse to accept his kowtow? At this time, Fan Zisong finally said in a gentle voice, "Old man, please calm down." Then, he turned to look at Li Yuehuan, who was full of expectation, and his smile faded. "Little girl, who gave you the courage to say bad things about my junior sister apprentice?" Hearing this, Li Yuehuan, who began to feel that something was wrong, suddenly turned pale and trembled. "Su Li, she didn't." Fan Zisong didn't want to continue talking with her. He raised his head and said loudly to the villagers, "Go away. I'm just here to accompany my junior sister apprentice home to visit her relatives." Chapter 344. The villagers of Tieha village naturally didn't dare to listen to Fan Zisong's words and dispersed. At night, in the wooden house, Huang put a basket full of cooked sweet potatoes on the table, rubbed his hands and apologized. "Immortal, there is nothing delicious at home. Sorry to make you laugh. There was a trace of shame on his face, but there was still a hint of surprise in his eyes. According to what Fan Zisong said in front of everyone, it was a great thing that Su Li was accepted as a disciple by the Mount Head in the sect. With the protection of her master, Su Li could survive in the cultivation circle even if she didn't make great achievements in the future. Fan Zisong smiled after hearing Huang's words. His slender hand, which used to kill people with a sword, picked up a sweet potato, which seemed a little strange. It doesn't matter. I haven't eaten the food of mortals for many years, and I miss it. Huang nodded. It seemed that Fan Zisong was much kinder than the previous two immortals, but he, who had lived in the sect, knew clearly that all this was because of Su Li. After tasting the sweet potato, Fan Zisong, who was used to eating spiritual cuisine, frowned and turned to Su Li and Jining. You too, go to practice. Even if the spiritual power in the secular world is not enough, don't slack off. Yes, senior fellow apprentice. Su Li glanced at Huang and went to the inner room with Jining. Huang had good eyesight. After the two closed the door, he immediately bowed and said, Li is indebted to you. No matter what you want to know, I will tell you everything I know. You are a smart person, so I don't have to waste a lot of words. Fan Zisong changed his sitting posture and looked at Huang, who looked tense. He still looked kind and squinted with a smile. Don't be nervous. I just want to know the past of the junior sister apprentice and her name. Huang knew that he couldn't hide it anymore, so he immediately told him the whole story of Han Feng changing his name, and then he told him clearly about Su Li's life experience that he knew. Fan Zisong was enlightened. The name Su Li was indeed a taboo in the cultivation circle. However, when the bloody accident happened, he was not born yet and did not experience the horror of that year. He didn't feel much except for obeying his master's instruction not to mention the name. Junior Marshal Brother Han did well. It's good that Junior Marshal Sister can avoid the taboo and cultivate in peace. However, Junior Marshal Sister's background is really... Fan Zisong showed understanding in his eyes. Anyone who had been tortured by his father since childhood would have a different state of mind from ordinary children. What's more, she had suffered a lot. So that lotus mark is actually a scar. Fan Zisong muttered to himself. Before he stepped on the path of cultivation, he wandered around without parents, but no one deliberately abused him. Although the junior sister apprentice was born with sound parents, it was worse than having no parents. Now that junior sister has entered master's tutelage, it can be said that the bitterness is over and the sweetness is beginning. Fan Zisong, who thought he completely understood Su Li's past, felt a sense of pity in his heart, and immediately looked at Huang with a more gentle gaze. Now the cultivation circle in Jiuzhou region is declining, and junior martial sister apprentice is also a 1 in 1,000 cultivation genius. You have helped junior martial sister apprentice, so I, as her senior martial brother, can't be stingy. After saying that, he spread his psychic awareness to cover Huang. After exploring his physical condition, he was slightly surprised. This person's pneuma and blood were refined, and his pneuma was smooth. He was not like a mortal at all. On the contrary, he was about to enter Yunti realm, and only needed a practice method. Huang noticed Fan Zisong's change, and quickly bent down and said, I used to be a handyman in Yushu's sect for several years. Later, I made some mistakes and was driven down the mountain. I'm only alive. Sorry to make you laugh at me. No wonder. Fan Zisong suddenly understood, it seems that you have reached the peak of Yunti realm. When you went down the mountain, you were deprived of your memory and cultivation, but you can still maintain your physical state. It's really rare. Huang smiled bitterly. His cultivation was deprived and his foundation was greatly damaged. When he came to Tieha village, he clearly felt that his physical strength was not as good as before, and his body was a little worse than that of ordinary people of the same age. But over the years, he worked hard every day for Suli, and his physical condition was getting better and better instead of deteriorating. This made him puzzled, but he also knew that it was not appropriate to ask Fan Zisong about it, so as not to complicate matters. Well, since you have this opportunity, I will give you a practice method of Yunti realm. This method is not passed down from Huajian's sect, but obtained by me personally. If you can make some achievements with it, it is your good fortune. However, you must remember that only you can practice this method, and you must not pass it on to others. Otherwise, you know the end. Fan Zisong was silent for a moment, and suddenly said. Huang was stunned when he heard the words, and then he was ecstatic. Without saying anything, he knelt down and kowtowed, Immortal, I, Huang Dashan, will remember your kindness. I swear to heaven that I will never pass on the practice method to others. Fan Zisong smiled slightly and nodded gently. At his cultivation, a mental method of Yunti realm was nothing. In the inner room, Su Li's psychic awareness covered the central room. Seeing this scene, she couldn't help but frown slightly. She wanted to pass on a mental method to Huang Dashan when she came back, but she didn't expect that Fan Zisong did it for her, which saved her a lot of trouble to explain. After Huang Dashan took a rest, Fan Zisong glanced at Su Li and Fan Zisong, who had fallen asleep. Then he pushed open the courtyard door and left the mud house. The night was as cold as water, and the whole Tieha village was shrouded in silent darkness. Occasionally, there were a few barks. He walked all the way to Taishui River and looked at the ink-like river in the night, with a strange light flashing in his eyes. Boy, this river is really a bit weird. An old voice suddenly came from the jade token around his neck. Fan Zisong suddenly heard it. Instead of being surprised, he was happy. He quickly communicated with the owner of the voice with psychic awareness. Senior, you wake up. 200 years ago, he got this jade token and awakened the existence in it. Under the guidance of the senior who didn't want to be named, he didn't know how many detours he took. There were some obscure treasures that even the master didn't know, but the senior could easily get them and use them to improve his cultivation. He knew that the mysterious senior must have an extraordinary background. He always believed in repaying kindness with kindness. When he succeeded in his cultivation one day, he would definitely find a suitable physical body for the senior to resurrect him. However, in recent years, the senior's sleeping time was getting longer and longer. He couldn't help but worry whether the senior could wait until the day he succeeded in his cultivation. Boy, what are you thinking about? Go east as I said. The old and familiar voice came into his mind. Fan Zisong immediately came to himself and walked to the place pointed by the senior. A moment later, Fan Zisong walked to the end of Taishui River. Looking at the bare khaki hillside that had been over-harvested, he said helplessly, Senior, there is no mystery on this mountain. Are we really going to go up? Stop. It's weird here. Squat down and condense the vital energy according to the formula I gave you. Fan Zisong did as he was told. He drew a semicircle with his right hand and combined it with his left hand. A full moon-like shadow was suddenly reflected on the river in front of him. Fan Zisong himself was surprised by this strange phenomenon. He had learned this technique for some time, but he had never encountered such a situation before. If Su Li was here at the moment and saw this strange phenomenon, she would definitely recognize that this was not a full moon shadow, but clearly reincarnation mirror. Sure enough, it's really here. The old voice suddenly became excited. Yunjing Lake, the disappeared Yunjing Lake, is actually here. Fan Zisong was confused. He vaguely felt that the three words Yunjing Lake were a little familiar, but he seldom paid attention to the past of the cultivation circle. He frowned and thought for a long time before he remembered the origin of the name. He couldn't help but be surprised. Senior, Is the Yunjing Lake? You mentioned the lake that the ancient treasure, reincarnation mirror, broke and fell into 1,000 years ago. It said that Yunjing Lake is rooted in the void, boundless and comparable in size to Jojo. How could it be? Fan Zisong looked at the ordinary river in front of him that could be crossed with one step. He couldn't help showing a strange expression. Perhaps no one would associate this river with Yunjing Lake. Reincarnation mirror. The old voice became a little bitter. After a long time, a sigh came out. The past is a mystery. Who knows what happened at that time? Even the ancient treasure could be broken. Nothing is impossible. Fan Zisong nodded, but he secretly kept a secret in his heart. He had never seen the senior show his emotions, but the senior was so excited when he mentioned reincarnation mirror just now. In the jade token, the shadow in a gray robe raised his head. His eyes seemed to pass through the jade token and see the endless void. The location of Yunjing Lake was not easy to change. Right above this place was probably the void where reincarnation mirror was. Unexpectedly, after 1,000 years, an ordinary village appeared in the originally lifeless area. After all, it was the place where the ancient treasure fell. The creatures here only needed to touch a little luck of reincarnation mirror, and it was enough to make a meteoric rise. Boy, there should be a lot of good seedlings of cultivation in this village. Take some back and give them to your sect to cultivate. Maybe there will be some outstanding people. The senior said. Fan Zisong couldn't help but chuckle. Senior, you are really clever. A few days ago, my junior fellow apprentice found 2 children with immortal latency from the village and took them into our sect. One of them has a complete spiritual root. Although the other only has 70% spiritual root, he is talented and intelligent. Maybe he can break through the realm of Zhuji realm and reach Jindan realm. The man in a gray robe couldn't help but laugh. The good seedlings he mentioned were not just ordinary spiritual roots. But he just said it casually and didn't bother to tell Fan Zisong in detail. During the communication of their psychic awareness, Fan Zisong walked back. Suddenly, he stopped in his tracks and looked at the petite figure squatting by the riverside with a startled expression. Junior sister apprentice Sue, why are you here? Hearing this, the old figure in the jade token shook violently in an instant. He almost couldn't maintain his figure and dissipated. The booming sound made Fan Zisong's head hurt. Chapter 345. Senior fellow apprentice, what's wrong with you? Suli saw that Fan Zisong suddenly stood still after asking a question. A faint light flashed in her eyes. She sensed a pneuma that didn't belong to Fan Zisong at all, and seemed familiar. Senior, this Suli is not the Suli you know. Don't get me wrong. Fan Zisong couldn't care about the outside world at this moment. He transmitted his thoughts to the chaotic phantom in the jade token again and again. After struggling for a few breaths, the phantom finally returned to peace. Fan Zisong rubbed his temples and looked up at Suli, who was looking at him curiously. He forced a gentle smile and said, Senior fellow apprentice, I'm fine. Why don't you sleep in the middle of the night and come here? Suli shook her head and pointed to the low bungalow across the river. Fan Zisong suddenly realized that it should be the place where Suli grew up, as Huang Dashan said. No wonder this girl appeared here. No matter what she had experienced there, it was the place where she was born after all. Do you want to have a look? Facing Fan Zisong's increasingly gentle question, Suli nodded. She didn't want to go, but it was an excuse. After the blood practitioner's death, she wanted to come back to see if there were other fragments of reincarnation mirror in the Taishui River. It was convenient to go back to her hometown with Fan Zisong as a cover. There is no fragment falling in the Taishui River. The end of the river is the place where I picked up reincarnation mirror, so I don't need to go there. Perhaps, there is another guess that the ring of reincarnation mirror is recondensed from all the fragments in the Taishui River. The fragments in this river can condense into a mirror ring, plus the legend, is this Yunjing Lake. Thinking of this, Suli raised her head and glanced at the empty sky. The bright moon hung high, like a mirror in a trance. Fan Zisong didn't notice this scene, but the old figure who had been paying attention to Suli after waking up in the jade token was slightly shocked when he saw it. She really isn't. After a while, the two came to the dilapidated house on the east side of the river. 7 or 8 years had eroded the bungalow, with weeds and cobwebs everywhere. Suli stood silently in front of the door and suddenly remembered the woman who gave birth to her. She should not have appeared in the world. Black Lotus Ring reversed her fate, which was equivalent to killing the woman's flesh and blood. She should be given some compensation. Senior brother, I don't want to watch anymore. Let's go back. Suli suddenly said and turned away, leaving Fan Zisong who was at a loss. Why did the junior sister apprentice's mind become more and more difficult to understand after coming back? The next morning, Suli found Fan Zisong. You want to leave? Then your grandfather. Suli nodded, but did not say the reason. Fan Zisong glanced at Huang, who was still cooking breakfast in the earthen stove outside the door. He was slightly surprised. This girl's concept should not be divorced from the mortal world. She didn't miss Huang Dashan at all. After I reach the foundation establishment stage, I will come back to visit Grandpa. Suli's childish voice was unusually calm and serious, but Fan Zisong didn't know whether to laugh or cry. It seemed that he misunderstood the junior sister apprentice. Did this girl really think that cultivation was as simple as eating and drinking? When she reached the foundation establishment stage, Huang Dashan would have reincarnated several times. However, this kind of thing couldn't be explained clearly. When the girl entered the Lianqi realm, she would understand. Needless to say, he also found out the details of Taishui and didn't want to stay any longer. He couldn't help but nod and said, after you two have breakfast, we will leave. Don't waste your grandfather's kindness. He saw that Huang Dashan went to the town early in the morning to buy white rice porridge and steamed bread. Suli nodded slightly. I'll say goodbye to Grandpa first. Go ahead. Fan Zisong chuckled and didn't listen to what she said to Huang Dashan. No matter how strange this girl's character was, she was still a child, and her temperament was sincere. When she grew up, she would understand the friendship between the master and the disciple. Suli came to the earthen stove and stood quietly. Huang Dashan heard the movement and straightened up. When he saw Suli, he couldn't help but wonder, girl, I'm leaving. Suli interrupted Huang Dashan and looked at him. So fast. Huang Dashan couldn't help but be shocked. It was too fast to leave in one night. He thought that Suli could stay for at least 2 or 3 days. Suli nodded and didn't explain much. Sensing that Fan Zisong's psychic awareness did not cover, she continued, I will come back to you in less than a year. Take care of yourself this year. Stay in the village and practice peacefully. Don't go to other places. A year. Huang Dashan was stunned. Looking at Suli's serious appearance, he suddenly didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Girl, you talk like a little adult. You should listen to your master in the sect and don't make trouble for your senior fellow apprentice. It's not good to always think about an old guy like me. Suli frowned and said, what I said is true. Okay, I believe you. I will never leave the village this year. Seeing that Suli seemed to be angry, Huang couldn't help but laugh and comfort her. Well, I can't force you. Suli relaxed her eyebrows. She had said what she should say. If Huang Dashan really left Tieha village at that time and she couldn't find him, it was also his fate. She turned back to the house. Huang couldn't help but look gloomy and fell into thought. He suddenly woke up after Fan Zisong left with Su Li and Fan Zisong after breakfast. The words just now were really not like what a 14 or 15-year-old child would say. Even if someone taught her, the tone couldn't be taught. He remembered that Su Li would more or less behave differently from ordinary children over the years. He thought it was just because Su Li had a miserable childhood and matured a little earlier. But now it seemed that it was not so. Huang Dashan's heart was heavy. Maybe he should really look forward to the meeting with Su Li a year later. Jincheng dynasty was one of the few imperial dynasties of cultivation in the secular world of Zhuzhou region. Of course, compared with the sects in the cultivation circle, the imperial cultivation was just like playing house. The highest cultivation was only the peak of Zhuji realm, and the means were simple. If they were enemies with Fan Zisong who came from a sect, they might not even be able to resist one move. This was also the reason why Fan Zisong dared to come to the imperial court with Su Li and Fan Zisong. Here we are. Senior fellow apprentice, it's there. Ji Ning pointed to the very eye-catching golden palaces below and shouted excitedly. Fan Zisong responded and landed, but he thought that this was the reaction that ordinary children should have when they returned to their hometown. He remembered that Su Li didn't even move her eyebrows when she returned to her hometown a few days ago. In order not to cause trouble, Fan Zisong landed in the mountain forest not far from the imperial city, and then took Su Li and Fan Zisong to the gate of the imperial city on foot. During this period, he did not forget to tell them, Junior Sister Apprentice Jean, although you know the real name of Junior Sister Apprentice, you can't say it in front of outsiders. Do you understand? Junior Sister Apprentice, you should always keep it in mind. Ji Ning nodded repeatedly and said in a crisp voice, Senior fellow apprentice, I will keep it in mind. Su Li nodded silently. She knew the danger of exposure better than anyone else. In the blink of an eye, the three entered the city. There were endless pedestrians on the busy streets, and the noise made the three who hadn't seen the bustle for a long time feel that it was a lifetime ago. Junior Sister Apprentice has never been to a big city, right? Senior fellow apprentice, I want to take Junior Sister Apprentice to go shopping and buy some beautiful clothes. It can be regarded as a good host. Ji Ning, who returned to her hometown, was obviously much more at ease. After getting Fan Zisong's approval, she immediately took Su Li into a luxury clothing shop, and kept talking. Fan Zisong had a smile at the corner of his mouth, following behind her. It was nice to have a moment of leisure before entering the secret realm of shattered spirits. After a short stroll, Fan Zisong, who was leaning on a wooden pillar, suddenly sensed something and looked at the door. As expected, he saw a burly leader rushing in with the Imperial Guards, which immediately caused a small disturbance. In the blink of an eye, the burly leader was in front of him. When he was about to surpass him and step into the shop where the two junior sister apprentices were, Fan Zisong stood in front of the leader and said lightly, "Why are you here?" Seeing his extraordinary temperament, the burly leader slightly restrained his arrogance, but his tone was still impatient. He said in a deep voice, "The Imperial Guards of the Imperial Palace are on business. Irrelevant people, get out of the way." Fan Zisong raised his eyebrows, but he didn't get angry. He just said, "My two junior sister apprentices are trying clothes inside. You can't go in before they come out. How dare you?" The burly leader suddenly became angry and was about to take action. Fan Zisong looked slightly cold, but at this moment, Jin Ying's voice suddenly came, "Is it Commander Wang?" The two people who were about to take action were stunned and turned to look at the shop. They saw Ji Ning in a bright goose yellow palace dress coming out. Behind her was Su Li in a black dress. Her waterfall-like long hair fluttered casually behind her, with a red hair ornament on her head. Coupled with her white and delicate face, she was like a night elf, exuding an ethereal atmosphere. Fan Zisong's eyes flashed a trace of amazement. His junior sister apprentice was as beautiful as a fairy. She was so outstanding just by dressing up a little. The burly leader on the side didn't notice Su Li. After seeing Jining, he became relaxed and stepped forward quickly, saying anxiously, 14th Princess, why are you here? Didn't you follow 13th Prince to Huajin sect? Jining suddenly smiled sweetly and looked at Fan Zisong, who had recovered his gentle look. Senior fellow apprentice brought me back. Senior fellow apprentice. The burly leader was immediately stunned. Then he reacted and looked back to see Fan Zisong with a calm face. Dense cold sweat immediately broke out on his forehead, and he asked cautiously, Senior, are you an outstanding disciple of Huajin sect? After seeing Fan Zisong nod, the burly leader's face became paler. His attitude towards this senior just now was not friendly at all. Since you are ignorant and close to my junior sister apprentice, I won't blame you. Chapter 346. The Imperial Palace. Commander Wang's face changed slightly. After a moment of hesitation, he dismissed the Imperial guards behind him. One stayed and said in a low voice, Senior, 14th Princess, you'd better not go to the Imperial Palace now. Fan Zisong frowned, and Jining was even more puzzled. She asked aloud, why? Commander Wang sighed, this is not a good place to talk. Senior and Princess, please move. Let's talk in another place. Well, let's go to the restaurant over there. Fan Zisong nodded and pointed to the 3-story building not far away. Then he pulled Su Li and Jining to move forward. Commander Wang noticed that there was a younger girl beside Fan Zisong besides Princess Royal Highness. In terms of appearance, she was even more beautiful than Princess Royal Highness. However, he was worried and didn't pay much attention to Su Li. After a while, the 4 of them sat down in the elegant room of the restaurant. Commander Wang ordered the waiter to bring tea. After organizing his words, he finally said, Princess Royal Highness, shortly after you and 13th Prince left, the Imperial Palace was in chaos. The Emperor failed to break through in the deep Imperial Palace and was seriously injured by the backfire. Although the news was immediately suppressed by the Empress, I don't know who spread it, but everyone in the Imperial Palace knows it. The obedient princes are all ready to make trouble, and the Imperial harem is even more chaotic. Every day, many spies sneak in to find out the location of the Emperor's retreat. It is impossible to prevent it. And many little princesses and princes in the Imperial Palace have been killed. Not long ago, I received the news that someone saw you in the clothing shop. I thought someone pretended to be you, but I didn't expect it to be true. At this critical moment, Princess Royal Highness, you must not go back. Fan Zisong nodded gently. With his divine awareness, he could naturally see that Commander Wang's words were sincere without any falsehood. It was just a turmoil in the Imperial Palace. If he took action to calm it down, it would be easy. But, he turned his eyes and fell on Jining. What about my Imperial mother? Did she get hurt? Jining's face was a little pale. She tightly grasped the edge of the tablecloth and stared at Commander Wang and asked. Commander Wang smiled bitterly. He had a close relationship with Consort Ling and had expected that the 14th princess would ask this question. But it was useless to lie now, so he could only tell the truth. A few days ago, the bedchamber where Consort Ling lived was smashed into pieces. Fortunately, Consort Ling had some cultivation foundation and escaped quickly without being crushed to death. However, she was hit in the chest by the thief and has not woken up yet. What? Jining immediately stood up and looked at Fan Zisong for help. Senior fellow apprentice, I'm going to the Imperial Palace. Fan Zisong smiled slightly, touched Jining's head, and said, Go if you want to. Don't be afraid. I am with you. Maybe I can cure your mother's injury. Hearing this, Jining immediately burst into laughter. She was surprised and happy. Yes, I still have my senior fellow apprentice. He is the disciple of the Mount Head, so he must have great magical power. It is not difficult for him to cure my mother. General Wang, let's go to the palace. Commander Wang nodded repeatedly and got up to lead the way. He was shocked. He had heard what Jining said just now. This young man turned out to be the disciple of the Mount Head of Huajian sect. Wouldn't the 14th princess, thinking of the difficult situation of Consort Ling in these years, Commander Wang breathed a long sigh of relief. Consort Ling finally had a bright future. Su Lei followed Fan Zisong silently. Her eyes were gloomy. Since she met Commander Wang, she didn't say a word. She just looked at him quietly. In her field of vision, Commander Wang was surrounded by a faint layer of black air. Although it was not obvious, it could be seen clearly with a little attention. She had been observing Fan Zisong's reaction just now, but found that he looked as usual and didn't notice it. Only I can see it. With this conclusion, Su Lei became more and more thoughtful. Was it the Black Lotus ring or the body of evil ghost? Apart from these two things, she really couldn't think of any ability to surpass Fan Zisong at present. Tan Tai Feng once said that every ghost clan would stimulate a unique talent ability. Although there are many kinds, each of them is very powerful. The body of evil ghost is a taboo of the ghost clan, so it must also have a talent ability. Is this my talent? She frowned slightly, but what did the black air represent? Black Lotus ring didn't respond, and no one could tell her. She could only explore by herself. Under the escort of the Imperial Guards, they passed through the long palace gate and came to the rather deserted front hall square. Commander Wang led them to the harem without stopping. Along the way, they could hardly see the figures of the palace maids and eunuchs. Instead, they saw many piles of yellow leaves dancing in the wind on the ground. It was a desolate scene everywhere. Fan Zisong couldn't help but narrow his eyes slightly. The situation in the palace seemed to be more serious than he thought. But at this moment, Commander Wang stopped in front of an old palace with a very small area and mottled walls. He said, "Here we are. Consort Ling is temporarily placed here." Jining was stunned and exclaimed, "Isn't this the cold palace?" Commander Wang. Commander Wang sighed again and didn't speak. He just let everyone in. Jining was the first to rush to the front and open the door. At a glance, she saw the old palace maid squatting beside the medicine stove in the yard. The old palace maid heard the sound and looked up. When she saw Jining, she was immediately surprised and happy. "Your Highness, you are back." After saying that, the old palace maid remembered something and her face changed immediately. "Your Highness, aren't you?" When she thought of the scene that Her Highness was asked by 13th Prince to be a concubine to go to the immortal sect with him a few months ago, she couldn't help feeling a little humiliated. Was it possible that 13th Prince was tired of playing with her in such a short time? "Mammy Hui, it's not what you think." Jin Ying's explanation made Mammy Hui stunned. Commander Wang, who was anxious, couldn't help interrupting, "I will explain it to you later. The urgent thing is to see Consort Ling first. This is a disciple from the immortal sect. He must have a way to cure Consort Ling." Hearing this, Mammy Hui was overjoyed. She quickly got up and saluted to Fan Zisong, "Your Excellency, please take care of my Consort Ling." Fan Zisong didn't say anything but just smiled slightly. "Lead the way." Okay. Mammy Hui opened the door of the side hall, and a group of people filed in. Su Lei stepped into the door and saw the dim picture in the room. She couldn't help but stop. Fan Zisong, who sensed this change, was also stunned and asked softly, "What's wrong?" He saw that this girl's eyebrows had not loosened all the way. Sulik shook her head and didn't speak. Even if she said it, Fan Zisong wouldn't believe it. The room was full of visible black air, and the deeper it was, the thicker it was. The moment she stepped into the room, she could feel that there was a natural power in her body suddenly trembling. Fan Zisong didn't know why, but it was not the time to explore. He took Suli and continued to walk inside. Soon they came to the bedside. A pale but beautiful woman was lying quietly, with her chest rising and falling slightly. Mother! Jin Ying's eyes turned red in an instant. She was about to rush to the bedside, but found that Fan Zisong didn't let go of her hand. She couldn't help but look up in astonishment. Senior fellow apprentice. Fan Zisong frowned tightly. The woman in front of him gave him a very bad feeling, just like the demon he once met in that place. Her breath was strange and made him feel uncomfortable, as if he was stared at by something ominous. He suddenly remembered that Suli paused before entering the room. Could it be that the junior sister apprentice had already noticed it at that time? Fan Zisong looked down in surprise and found that Suli was looking at the woman with a dignified gaze. To be precise, she was looking at the woman's shoulder. Dignified? How could a 14-year-old girl have such a gaze? Fan Zisong was surprised and doubtful. When he looked at Suli again, he found that she was ignorant. Her eyes were clear but full of confusion, as if everything he had seen before was an illusion. Could it be that this strange feeling is making me hallucinate? Fan Zisong was slightly shocked and immediately let go of them. He made a gesture and shouted softly, "There is spirit in heaven and earth. All things gather." As soon as he finished speaking, a light blue circular boundary immediately enveloped everyone in the room, including Consort Ling, who was lying on the bed. In Su Li's vision, she immediately saw that the inky black air was pushed away by the boundary. But in the blink of an eye, the black air seemed to be boiling and crazily drilled into the boundary. Its direction was Consort Ling's shoulder. No! Sensing the crazy strange breath, Fan Zisong's face turned as pale as paper in the blink of an eye. He immediately sat cross-legged and madly made gestures to resist the black air that wanted to drill into the boundary. Since he had promised his junior sister apprentice, he must not break his promise. No matter whether he could save Consort Ling or not, he had to try. What's the matter? Senior fellow apprentice, what's wrong with you? Fan Zisong didn't have time to explain. Ji Ning didn't understand the situation and suddenly panicked. Commander Wang and Mammy Hui were also at a loss. At their level, they couldn't touch the real cultivation at all, let alone the means of practitioners in Juji realm. Senior fellow apprentice. Looking at Fan Zisong, who closed his eyes, Ji Ning was about to go up and pull his sleeve. But at this moment, a hand stopped in front of her. He can't be distracted now. You take Commander Wang and Mammy Hui to leave first. Hearing this extremely calm voice, Ji Ning immediately calmed down and saw clearly that it was Su Li who stopped her in front of her. Junior sister apprentice Su, you must have a way, right? Jin Ying's eyes suddenly lit up. She knew that Su Li had some unknown secrets. Commander Wang and Mammy Hui were indeed hesitant. This girl looked younger than Her Highness, and Her Highness called her junior sister apprentice. Obviously, she entered the sect later than Her Highness. How could she have a way? Was Her Highness confused because of anxiety? Your Highness, the urgent matter is, Commander Wang opened his mouth and wanted to say something, but he was interrupted by a cold voice before he finished speaking. Hurry up. Su Li's face was a little gloomy. She had to take action. Otherwise, when Fan Zisong couldn't bear the serious injury, she would lose a power that temporarily protected her, and the possibility of exposure would be greater. Chapter 347. Jining was shocked and immediately woke up. Instead of being angry, she was happy. There was a voice in her heart telling her that this was the real junior sister apprentice Sue. I'm leaving now. Commander Wang, Mammy Hui, come with me. Commander Wang and Mammy Hui both looked strange. Commander Wang, who was straightforward, was quite angry. He glanced at Su Li and said bluntly, Your Highness, why do you listen to your junior sister apprentice? Instead of listening to the nonsense of a girl younger than you, we'd better find a way by ourselves. Yes, Your Highness, the immortal senior is trapped. This matter is critical. Don't take it lightly. The two chattered on one side. Jining saw Su Li's impatient look on her face. Somehow, she thought of the black-robed man who knocked her out in her dream that day. She felt a chill in her heart and showed her majesty as a member of the palace for the first time. I'm the master. You all go out with me. Commander Wang and Mammy Hui were confused. Then they remembered their identity. How could they disobey the orders of the royal family members? Your Highness, alas, Commander Wang sighed. Looking at Jining's firm face, he knew that it was useless to say anything. He could only go out with Mammy Hui. After driving the two away, Jining stayed in the same place and said with pleading eyes, Junior sister apprentice Sue, can I stay? I know that day was not a dream at all. The man was not a good person at first glance. But in the end, both of us are alive. Although I am young, I am not stupid. I'll help you keep this a secret. I'll never tell anyone else. Su Li glanced at her and said lightly, if you want to stay, you can stay. But no matter what you see, you can only stand there. If you move, you know the consequences. Anyway, after she broke through Zhuji realm, she would definitely erase some of Jinying's memories. It didn't matter if she saw it now. Really? Jining was pleasantly surprised. When she saw Su Li's faint gaze, she immediately covered her mouth and dared not to make a sound. Even her breathing slowed down a lot, but she still couldn't hide the joy in her eyes. She just took a chance and didn't expect that Su Li really agreed. Ignoring the existence of Jining, Su Li's eyes returned to Consort Ling. After pondering for a moment, she walked over. In Jinying's puzzled eyes, she gently put her palm on the shoulder without any wound. In the next moment, an extremely huge suction came from Su Li's palm. Concubine Ling, who was in a coma, groaned, and a blood sword came out directly from her shoulder and fell into Su Li's hand. Su Li glanced at the black air that changed its direction and became more and more turbulent. The light blue boundary was covered with dense fragments. Su Li no longer hesitated and immediately walked out of the boundary with the bloodstained thing in her hand. Boom! Countless wisps of black gas seemed to have found a source to vent their anger on. They frantically surged into the blood-stained object, washing away the blood and revealing the true nature of the object. It was a black pearl, sparkling and translucent, emitting a gem-like radiance. What on earth is the source of the black gas? Su Li glanced at the black gas that was completely absorbed inside and outside the room, and then looked at Fan Zisang, who was still meditating and recovering. She immediately stopped suppressing the power in her body. Then she felt a wonderful touch extending from her body to her palm. In the blink of an eye, the black pearl turned into a pile of stone powder. After swallowing up the black gas inside, it shrank back. A thought of hungry was transmitted to Su Li's awareness. See. Hungry. That power was crying out for food. Could it be that this black gas was her food? Su Li had a headache thinking about it. If she could find some records about the body of Evil Ghost, she wouldn't be so ignorant. However, it was impossible for a small sect like Huajian's sect to have the record of the body of Evil Ghost. Even Yushu's sect. She didn't see the description about it in the sex classics. If she wanted to get the news, she might have to rely on luck. Who? There was a sound of relief behind her. It was Fan Zisong who woke up. Suli waved her hand to disperse the stone powder and glanced at Jining, who was still in a daze. Jining immediately woke up and thought about how to explain it to Fan Zisong. She was confused. From her point of view, Suli just drew out a pearl from her mother's body, and then crushed it. Then there was nothing left. However, even senior fellow apprentice couldn't solve the crisis, but Suli could solve it casually. From this point of view, many things could be seen. Although I don't know why the powerful fluctuation disappeared, I survived it. Fan Zisong opened his eyes, and a trace of fear flashed across his face. After seeing that Suli and Jining were safe and sound, he felt at ease. When he released his awareness, he was surprised to find that there was no strange feeling in the whole room. What happened during this period? Fan Zisong was a little confused. But looking at the two girls who were at a loss, he could only smile bitterly. It seemed that no one could answer for him. Where are Commander Wang and others? Jining quickly said, they just went out to find a way. I'll call them over. Then she ran out quickly without waiting for Fan Zisong's response. Seeing this, Suli relaxed a little. At least for now, it seemed that Jining would firmly keep the secret for her. Not long after, Commander Wang and Mammy Hui entered the room together. Since they had been instructed, they naturally wouldn't show any difference to Suli, but they were inevitably shocked. They had all misjudged her before. It was not Fan Zisong who was really powerful, but this young girl. Not long after, Fan Zisong sat by the bed, withdrew his psychic awareness, and said with a smile, it's just some internal injuries that are not serious. I will nurse her with spiritual power, and she will wake up at night. He felt strange in his heart. As long as she took medicine on time, she would wake up in a few days. It was impossible for it to take so long. He still thought that Consort Ling's coma had something to do with the vision just now. But the vision was obviously terrible. Why did it suddenly disappear when she was about to be seriously injured? Jining and others didn't know Fan Zisong's distress at the moment, and they all looked happy. Great! Senior fellow apprentice, thank you so much. Fan Zisong smiled bitterly in his heart. He knew that he couldn't explain it, so he could only nod and let it go. In the evening, Consort Ling woke up as expected. She was naturally happy to see her daughter coming back, and her pale face immediately looked much better. After thanking him, Consort Ling gradually looked worried. She turned her head and asked, Commander Wang, do you know where His Majesty is practicing in isolation? Commander Wang shook his head quickly and said with a bitter smile, if I knew, how could I still stand here leisurely? I'm afraid I would have been caught and tortured by Lord Ning and others. Consort Ling looked disappointed, but she also knew that what Commander Wang said was the truth. How about the Empress now? The Empress? Mammy Hui snorted when she heard the words, she is not as affectionate as you. She moved out the second day after you were seriously injured, and I also heard that she had contact with Lord Ning secretly. What? Consort Ling was stunned, and her face turned gloomy. She asked, where? Where did you hear this? Mammy Hui suddenly became speechless and regretted that she couldn't control her mouth. If it was known by the Empress, she and Consort Ling couldn't escape. But now that she said it, she could only continue to grit her teeth and said, the embroidery maid of the embroidery building told me before she left. She saw with her own eyes that Lord Ning and the Empress talked happily together, and it was after the Emperor was seriously injured in isolation. Hearing this, Suli almost figured it out. It was nothing more than the Empress and Lord Ning joining hands to seize power. Maybe the so-called serious injury was caused by these two. Thinking of this, she quietly spread out her divine awareness. Fan Zisong just tried to find the place where the emperor practiced in isolation, but it didn't mean that she couldn't. Soon the information was fed back from the psychic awareness. After absorbing it, Suli was stunned. It was not that she didn't find it, but there were 3 places in the imperial palace, all of which were covered by hidden tactical matrices. One of them is the place where the Jincheng Emperor practiced in isolation, and the other 2. Su Li's eyes soon brightened, and she thought of something. The treasury of the Jincheng dynasty. There must be a large number of spiritual stones and even treasures for practice in the treasury. If she could get them, she could recover to Zhuji realm in a short time. It's not difficult to break the tactical matrix, but how to send Fan Zisong away? Su Li habitually touched her ring finger. She was still too weak now, and she couldn't even fly on the sword. She had no ability to protect herself at all. It was really unwise to expose her extraordinariness in advance. When Su Li was thinking hard to no avail, Fan Zisong had finished the discussion. The tactical matrix is very hidden. I can't detect it, and Lord Ning naturally can't find it. Please rest assured, Consort Ling. For the sake of my junior sister apprentice, I will spend 3 days to explore the imperial palace inch by inch. Maybe I can sense it when the distance is close. Hearing that Fan Zisong was willing to help, Consort Ling was immediately surprised and said repeatedly, Senior Fan, I will never forget your kindness. Fan Zisong smiled and gladly accepted her thanks. Then he took out 5 talismans and gave them to everyone, saying, if you encounter danger after I leave, you can activate this talisman. I will sense it and come back in the time when the talisman is activated. After giving everyone the means to protect themselves, Fan Zisong didn't stay any longer and turned to leave. The secret realm of shattered spirits was about to open. It would be a sin if he delayed in the Jincheng dynasty. Sensing that Fan Zisong's pneuma went away quickly, Su Li secretly said that she was lucky. Fan Zisong's departure saved her a lot of time. She looked back at Jining deeply, and then left without saying anything. In the blink of an eye, her petite figure disappeared outside the door. Consort Ling was stunned. Is that your junior sister apprentice? How? Jining looked a little complicated, and she couldn't tell what she felt in her heart. She said, Mother, junior sister apprentice Su is not an ordinary person. Don't ask so much, and don't tell senior fellow apprentice about it. Hearing this, Consort Ling became more and more surprised. After a while, she sighed deeply, you have grown up. Chapter 348. At the same time, in the desolate palace, Su Li went straight to the nearest weird place. Her psychic awareness spread all over the palace, and she always paid attention to Fan Zisong's position. She didn't want to meet this senior fellow apprentice, which would cause more trouble. Soon, Su Li came to an inconspicuous yard and stepped in. The old palace seemed to have been in disrepair for a long time, and it had been ravaged in recent days. Half of it had collapsed, revealing the dilapidated decorations. Su Li glanced at it and didn't go in. She walked to the round well in front of the house and jumped in without saying anything. Whoosh, the wind whistled in her ears, and she fell down rapidly. After dozens of breaths, Su Li's psychic awareness touched the ground. She immediately changed her posture and held her breath. Her feet landed gently like goose feathers without making any sound. It seems that this is an underground palace, but I don't know whether it is a secret place for practicing or a treasury for storing treasures. The darkness couldn't block Su Li's sight at all. She immediately saw that there was only one way in front of her, an artificial stone path that could allow one person to pass. It seems that I will get something soon. Su Li became interested and walked silently along the stone path. There was no sound of footsteps in the quiet space, only the dripping sound of groundwater seeping down from time to time. About 10 minutes later, a thick and huge light red stone door blocked in front of Suli. She raised her eyebrows and recognized the material of the stone door. Making a stone door with Hongyuan stone. The foundation of the Jincheng dynasty seems to be much more than I thought. Hongyuan stone was a common material for refining middle-grade defensive magic weapons, and it was extremely popular among practitioners in Juji realm. If it was refined into Hongyuan essence crystal, its level could go up to a higher level, and it could become a top-grade magic weapon that only practitioners in Jindan realm were qualified to use. For a refiner, refining took too much energy. If there was no specific need, few people would do such a thankless thing. It was precisely because it was stuck at the refinement stage that the red abyss stone dropped by 10%. It was only a middle-grade material, but even so, the value of a stone door was still quite high. According to Su Li's knowledge 1,000 years ago, it was worth tens of thousands of middle-grade spiritual stones. Didn't senior fellow apprentice fans say that the highest level in the Jincheng dynasty was just the practitioner in Juji realm? How could they use such precious materials to build the stone gate extravagantly? Is it possible that this place was not left by the Jincheng dynasty at all? Su Li was a little surprised and doubtful, but she still approached and began to explore. This kind of stone door was common in Yushu sect. The refiners who made the stone door generally left a back door. It was not difficult for her to unlock it with her tactical matrix cultivation. It didn't take long for Su Li to find a very inconspicuous depression in the lower right corner of the stone door. She touched it with her fingers, and the lines of the tactical pattern were completely reflected in her mind. Middle-grade spirit array. The spirit array master who set it up is just a so-so, barely passable. Thinking of this, Su Li smiled. With her master-level means, she broke the tactical matrix in the blink of an eye. Buzz buzz buzz. The red stone surface immediately lit up with a glimmer, and then a gap that could allow one person to enter was quietly opened. Seeing this, Su Li immediately flashed in. At the same time, in a mysterious stone house under the imperial palace, sitting on the ground, a figure in a rotten robe as stiff as a corpse suddenly moved, and his green eyes suddenly opened, like two groups of ghost fire. Who are you? How dare you open my secret warehouse and disturb my practice? You are courting death. When I finish this cycle, it will be the time of your death. After that, he closed his eyes again, and the pneuma of his body, which was like a dead tree, quickly became stronger. On the other side, Su Li, who did not notice it at all, walked in the brightly lit dry corridor. Her eyes were full of surprise. The layout here was much more sophisticated than that of the outside world. Just like the spiritual lamp that automatically lit up after the stone door was opened. There are really not many practitioners who are proficient in the mechanism technique in the cultivation circle. Who built this place? With all kinds of questions in her mind, Su Li didn't slow down. She, who knew a little about the mechanism technique, had seen that there were no dangerous traps here except the arrangement of the spiritual lamp. So, in a few flashes, she had come to the deepest stone room of the stone path. Suddenly, rows of dazzling treasure shelves came into view. The treasures in the secular world were piled up in the corner like garbage. What was qualified to be placed on the shelves were all precious things in the cultivation circle. There were so many kinds that even Su Li couldn't help but be more and more surprised. Although this place is not as good as Yushu sect, it is not inferior to the inventory of Huajian sect. I should be able to find a lot of useful things. With this thought in mind, Su Li's psychic awareness quickly swept over the shelves. First, she swept all the valuable things into the universe ring. When she was about to continue to fill the rest of the space of the ring with tactical matrix materials, she suddenly stopped and came to a square jade box on the innermost shelf like a whirlwind. Then, she carefully opened it. A pure white elixir immediately came into view. Next to the elixir, there was a thumb-sized round irregular stone. A refreshing fragrance mixed with a burst of fresh spiritual power came to her nose. Suli immediately closed the jade box with a snap, and a look of surprise appeared in her eyes. Juji elixir and the heart of spiritual stone. She didn't expect that there were such treasures for Juji realm in this barren land. The heart of spiritual stone was only the size of a thumb, but the spiritual power contained in it was extremely condensed. It could be directly absorbed without any loss or difficulty. This should be a treasure left by a practitioner to the younger generation. With these two things, ordinary practitioners can directly practice from the first hurdle of Lianqi realm to Zhuji realm in a short time. Suli glanced at the closed environment around her. There was a tactical matrix here. Although she didn't know whether it could let her break through quietly, it was absolutely no problem for practice. Jincheng Imperial Palace is not big, but it is not small either. With Fan Zisong's ability, it will take at least a few hours to explore all of them. It is enough for me to absorb the spiritual power now. Thinking of this, Suli no longer hesitated. She directly sat cross-legged in a pile of treasures, took out the heart of spiritual stone from the jade box, and quickly absorbed it. Just as Suli was working hard for recultivation after her rebirth, a fierce quarrel broke out in a hall in the clouds, which was unknown space away from Zhuzhou region. If you dare to leave, I will forget that you are my son. In the magnificent hall decorated with black jade, 18 blood-colored rune pillars stood erect. From the middle of the white jade avenue, each of them was divided into 9 pillars, bursting out a burst of blood-colored lightning from time to time. At the end of the white jade avenue, there was a stone throne exuding the breath of the underworld. A white-haired evil young man shrouded in black stood in front of the stone throne. The evil smile in the past had long disappeared from his face, and was replaced by coldness and rage. Below the stage, there was a young man who looked very similar to the young man, but he was dressed in a glaring white robe. He was not the least bit afraid of the tyrant, and a nonchalant smile hung on his face as he mocked, "Ho ho, I dare not be your son. You are the evil emperor who makes the whole Qingshui circle tremble with fear. I am not worthy of you." The teenager hid a trace of bitterness in his eyes very well, and said in a flat tone, "I am just a waste born by you and a maid when you were drunk. Even my surname can only follow my mother's, and I can't be included in the family tree. So, instead of living in this palace, you might as well drive me out of the palace and let me fend for myself." As soon as the words came out, the atmosphere of the entire hall instantly became more oppressive and heavy. The teenager groaned, and blood spilled from the corner of his mouth. His cultivation was naturally far less than that of his father. Even the pressure of his father's rage gave him the illusion that he would be smashed into pieces. Just when he thought he would die under the palm of his biological father's rage, his body suddenly relaxed. His father didn't kill him. The teenager was stunned. He knew that his father was cruel and merciless, not only to his enemies, but also to his own people. The 3,000 beauties in the palace were all playthings. Every year, many of them died in the hands of his father. In order to have no worries, his father had no other children except him. Even he was just an accident. The only thing that comforted him was that his mother didn't die in the hands of his father, but disappeared. However, he didn't see his father had any intention of looking for his mother. Well, for him, his mother was nothing. How could she be qualified for him to spend energy to look for her? However, his mother was still alive was the only motivation for him to practice in this cold palace. He practiced hard and thought about how to get out of the evil palace and find his mother's whereabouts all the time. And today, he seemed to see the hope of success. "Su Buwang, you are very good." The white-haired young man took a deep breath and sat down slowly. When he raised his head again, the anger on his face had disappeared, leaving only calmness. "You are the first person who dares to disobey my orders." For his father's change, Su Buwang was not surprised at all. He grinned. "Lord Evil Emperor, you flatter me." As soon as he finished speaking, he saw a jade rune shot out from the white-haired young man's hand. Su Buwang, who had already practiced successfully, reacted very quickly. After subconsciously catching it, he looked at the thing in his hand, but he was slightly stunned and then overjoyed. This was the token to leave the palace. Finally, he could leave this damn place. "Since you want to get out, then get out." The white-haired young man opened his eyes, and indifference rippled at the bottom of his eyes. "From now on, you are no longer a member of Xingtian Shrine. After you go out, don't mention our relationship and ruin my reputation. Otherwise, I will do it myself." Hearing his father's warning and threat, Su Buwang slightly suppressed the joy in his heart, smiled and saluted. He raised his head and said, "Lord Evil Emperor, don't worry. Even if I die, I will never mention your name to anyone." Now, Lord Evil Emperor should be satisfied, right? "Get out." The white-haired young man's figure flashed, but he had disappeared from the stone seat, leaving only a cold word echoing in the nothingness. Su Buwang didn't care. He just grinned and held the token in his hand tightly, his eyes full of expectation. Chapter 349. Out of the Black Palace, Su Buwang didn't pack anything and rushed to the bounded domain gate of the palace without looking back. He didn't want to owe any favor to Xingtian Shrine. Even the man's upbringing, he would find a chance to return it. Huh? Why are there few guards on the road? Did something happen? Looking around, Su Buwang felt a little strange, but soon he laughed at himself. "I am no longer a member of Xingtian Shrine, so I don't need to care about this." Thinking of this, he sped up again. Although it was the first time for him to leave the holy palace of Xingtian Shrine, he had imagined it countless times in his dreams today. He skillfully opened a gap in the bounded domain gate and flew out while laughing. Boom! At the moment when the bounded domain was closed, the white-haired young man, who was practicing in isolation in the depths of the Black Palace, sensed something. He raised his head and looked at it from a distance. A pair of long and beautiful eyes narrowed for a while, and a trace of indescribable bitterness appeared on his thin face. However, in the blink of an eye, this trace of bitterness had already disappeared, and had turned into indifference and depth that was no different from usual. "If you let him out like this, you can't explain to the palace lord." A sigh suddenly sounded from the darkness. The white-haired young man turned his eyes, and the light naturally lit up. The source of the sound was not a person, but a half-mirror suspended in the air. The mirror was full of mottled cracks, but a figure could still be seen shaking in it. That was Jing Xin. There was no doubt about the identity of the white-haired young man. It was Ling Li. After the reincarnation mirror was broken, she should have turned into dust between heaven and earth, but she was rescued by Ling Li, forcibly condensed, and placed in the reincarnation mirror that was reassembled after half of the broken mirror. "I can't let him marry into Huangxinghou. If I let him go to that kind of place, how can I face his mother?" When he said the last two words, Ling Li's voice suddenly became hoarse. Just thinking about the name made it difficult for him to control his emotions, not to mention saying it out. But in every minute and second of the past 1,000 years, he hoped that he could call out the name again and say to her aboveboard, "Be my real Taoist companion." However, that person was gone. He had been looking for her for 1,000 years, but he couldn't find her. The unbearable pain and despair gradually turned into a bearable numbness as time passed. But even so, the face of that person in his mind had become increasingly clear, and it hadn't become blurry because of the passing of 1,000 years. "Why are you doing this?" Jing Axan sighed and looked at Lingli with deep love. After the reorganization, she seemed to be reborn, and her nostalgia for Su Li became extremely faint. In the past 1,000 years, she only saw Lingli and only talked to him. Naturally, she had ideas that she shouldn't have. But she also knew that if she said this, she might not be able to stay with Lingli. Therefore, she had never mentioned a word about it. Evil Emperor, how can I be trapped by love? At least, I can't be in front of others. While murmuring, Lingli waved his hand to dim the mirror, and his eyes became sharp again. At the same time, a distant voice seemed to come from the sky. Lord Demonic Emperor, the Palace Master requests your presence. Lingli was not surprised. He got up and patted his clean black robe, and walked out slowly. Passing the pavilions along the stone road, one could see figures flashing on the peaks suspended in the endless clouds. Their blood and chi were soaring, and their roars were endless. Those were the disciples of Xingtian Shrine. In the past, he was also one of them. He overcame all difficulties and killed people like flies to get to where he was today. There were many disciples and servants along the way. When they saw Lingli, they all showed fear and panic. They kowtowed and saluted without saying a word. Lord Demonic Emperor. Lord Demonic Emperor. Lord Demonic Emperor. Lingli looked indifferent and didn't stop. Until his figure completely disappeared from sight, everyone was relieved and whispered. Isn't it said that the Lord Demonic Emperor is practicing in isolation? Why does he show up? It seems that the Lord Demonic Emperor is going to see the Palace Master. He deserves to be the god of massacre of Xingtian Shrine. Although he didn't release his momentum, I still feel frightened. On the other side, Lingli had stepped into the depths of Xingtian Shrine. At that time, there was a nothingness. The black cloud mountain was suspended in it. The fog was constantly rolling, mixed with dark blue lightning. On the top of the black mountain, the purple and black towering palace stood like an ancient giant, immortal. Xingtian Palace. Lingli's eyes were slightly cold. He stepped on the cloud mountain. Wherever he went, the blue lightning made a way for him, trembling as if it was afraid of Lingli's existence. Until the closed palace gate, Lingli did not hesitate to step in. Stepping into the palace, the lights suddenly brightened, isolating the noise of the collision of thunder and lightning. It seemed extraordinarily quiet. Lingli, do you know your mistake? As soon as Lingli stood still, the voice suddenly came from all directions. Although the tone was flat, it was brewing unimaginable pressure, as if it would break out in the next moment. Lingli seemed to feel something and suddenly turned to the right. His silver hair was swung behind him like a snow-white waterfall. It was clearly a bright hall, but the place he looked at was shrouded in darkness. His spiritual awareness could not penetrate it. Seeing this, Lingli showed his trademark evil smile on his face. Palace Lord, what are you talking about? What did I do wrong? You are stubborn. The figure in the dark snorted coldly. He didn't move, but Lingli was hit out by a huge force. He smashed on the top of the palace and fell to the ground. I haven't settled accounts with you yet. You have tarnished the bloodline of Ling family. You, on the other hand, are protecting that little bastard. Lingli spat out a mouthful of blood. He slowly stood up and raised his head. His eyes were as sharp as an eagle's. He looked at the black shadow slowly, and his bloody mouth suddenly rose. The bloodline of Ling family. Do I still remember the Palace Lord's entrustment that there is no relationship between you and me? How could Palace Master have forgotten about this matter in just a few thousand years? As soon as the words came out, the black shadow immediately stopped. After a long time, he spoke, but his tone was relaxed. You are the most powerful weapon in my hand. I don't want to lose you unless I have to. As for that little bastard, I will send someone to pick him up. You don't have to worry about him. Lingley still smiled. He stepped forward and stood in front of the Black Shadow. At this distance, if the Black Shadow wanted to, he could kill him easily. Palace Lord, I should be proud of your kindness. But, there is one more thing I forgot to tell you. I hope you can be generous and spare my life. The black gas around the Black Shadow immediately surged. It seemed that he had guessed what Lingley wanted to say. Disciple was careless and lost the young jade mask. Please punish me, Palace Master. Bastard. Stupid. How can I have such a stupid son like you? The Black Shadow was furious. The black gas suddenly spread and turned into a huge palm. It directly grasped Lingley's throat and lifted him into the air. A roar came from the Black Shadow, for a bastard brought back from the outside. You dare to disobey my order regardless of the future of Xingtian Shrine? Ha! Feeling the breath of death, Lingley didn't resist. He just looked at him quietly with a pair of cold eyes. The Black Shadow suddenly trembled with anger, but he also felt more aggrieved. He couldn't kill Lingley, otherwise, how could the young generation of Xingtian Shrine compete with other forces? Originally, as long as the little bastard went to Huangxing Palace, he could form an alliance with Huangxing Palace. Although Su Buwang's status was not popular in Xingtian Shrine, the outside world didn't know the details. The gold-lettered signboard of Palace Lord's grandson was enough to make Huangxing Palace realize the sincerity of Xingtian Shrine. But all of this was destroyed by Lingley, and there was no room for recovery. The young jade mask was a treasure Lingley got in the reincarnation mirror. The little bastard could completely change his breath with it. Qing Shui's circle was too big. It was like looking for a needle in a haystack for Xingtian Shrine to find him. Get out! The Black Shadow waved his sleeves and threw Lingley out of the palace gate like throwing garbage. If there is a next time, even if I lose the advantage of the young generation, I will kill him as a warning to others. I will not spare him. Lingley lay at the gate of the palace, motionless. When the power of restricting cultivation faded away like a tide, he slowly got up, glanced at the palace, and left silently. Kill him. Unless there was a genius who could replace him in Xingtian Shrine, the old guy would not kill him. What he said just now was nonsense. Back to the cold black palace, Lingley sat on the stone seat and looked at the empty bottom with empty eyes. He recalled that Su Buwang stood in front of him again and again over the years and insisted to go out of the palace regardless of the punishment. He was very like his mother. He suddenly reached out his hand, and the yin jade mask appeared in a flash of light. It seemed that the breath of Su Li in those years still remained on the jade mask. The cold lines on his face immediately became soft, as bright and warm as in the illusion. Li, do you know that our son has grown up? I have honed his mind for thousands of years in the palace. The boy is not less intelligent than you. He is more than enough to make a living in the cultivation circle. It's time to take me away. At this moment, in the underground treasure house of Jincheng Dynasty, the heart of spiritual stone in Su Li's hand was completely broken into useless stone powder with a crack. Boom! A vigorous breath like the sea suddenly broke out from Su Li's body, and the treasures on the shelf were scattered. The 10th hurdle of Lianqi realm, still a little short of completion. Sensing the situation in her body, Su Li frowned. Without saying anything, she grabbed the middle-grade spiritual stones piled up beside her and quickly absorbed them to fill the last gap. When dozens of middle-grade spiritual stones turned into powder, Su Li's breath finally reached a full and flawless state. The moment to restore the cultivation of Zhuji realm is finally coming. She opened her eyes and took a breath for a while. She absorbed the heart of spiritual stone for only 2 hours, which was far beyond her expectation. She thought it would take at least 4 hours. The power of the body of evil ghost is only reflected in the speed of energy absorption. Chapter 350. Her body suddenly changed, and Suli had to put down the Zhuji elixir for a while. While trying to suppress the pneuma that wanted to break through the unknown acupoint in her body, she calmed down and carefully sorted out the practice process. But she found no mistakes. Yes. There was no mistake at all. Why did she go to the wrong acupoint? Suli frowned tightly, gritted her teeth, and continued to suppress the pneuma. But the more she suppressed, the stronger the resistance of Black Lotus tactics was. This was a sign of being possessed by the devil. If it really broke through the acupoint, she would become a useless person and could no longer make progress. My life has just begun, and I must not stop here. Suli's eyes showed a ruthless expression. She stretched out her hand and bit her finger to draw quickly on the ground. Now she could only use the tactical matrix to forcibly seal all the cultivation in her body, and then find other solutions. But when she just drew halfway, the Black Lotus ring on her ring finger suddenly appeared on its own. A clear air came out from the rotation. It instantly broke through Suli's suppression and entered the unknown acupoint with lightning speed. Boom! A completely different and unique pneuma rose from Suli, and soon shrouded Suli's entire petite body. It was strange and beating in a rhythm different from Tao. At the same time, the clear sky above Jincheng Imperial Palace suddenly became dense with dark clouds and thunder. It was a doomsday scene. Some disciples with weaker cultivation were directly pressed to the ground, but ordinary people could not feel this pressure. This is nature's punishment. Fan Zisang, who was still exploring the Imperial Palace, stopped and looked at the dark clouds gathering in the sky in horror. Only the legendary mighty figures in nature's punishment would have nature's punishment. This small Jincheng Imperial Palace had mighty figures in nature's punishment. He couldn't help but be a little confused, and then he immediately became anxious. It was dangerous here, and he must take junior sister apprentices away immediately. In nature's punishment, there was not even a practitioner in Huashan realm in the entire Zhuozhou region, not to mention nature's punishment. Such existence was enough to destroy the entire Zhuozhou region. Boom! The thunder exploded, as if the sky was roaring. The spiritual pressure immediately increased a lot, and the sound of vomiting blood could be heard in the entire Imperial Palace. Fan Zisang half knelt on the ground and panted violently. It was difficult for him to move. Finally, he could only sit in place to resist the spiritual pressure. Even though he was extremely worried about the safety of his junior sisters, wanting to return in a short period of time was utterly wishful thinking. Now, he could only think of a way to swiftly flee this place after enduring the pressure of the heavenly tribulation. Moreover, the instigator of all of this was still in a meditative state, completely unaware of the situation he was in. After the dark clouds brewed to the limit, the thumb-thick purple thunder rolled out from it. It was directly facing the treasure house where Suli was. The mummified old man, who had just come out of practice, looked at the sky in horror. He clearly sensed that this thunder that had not yet fallen was enough to destroy the entire Jincheng Imperial Palace. How could a heavenly tribulation have such a huge killing range? No, 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 the mummified old man suddenly thought of something. He looked in the direction of the thunderbolt, and his expression was even more horrified than when he saw the thunderbolt. World-extinguishing thunderbolt. This is not a cultivator at the tribulation passing stage, but a monster that defies the heavenly Tao. There was a monster there. Was it possible that the Jincheng dynasty was hiding an evildoer that even heaven was jealous of? It's over, it's all over. No matter how powerful the evildoer is, he hasn't grown up after all. Otherwise, how could there be no movement at all? It's a pity that I just broke through and will die in this unexpected disaster. The mummified old man muttered with a pale face. He watched the first destructive thunderbolt was about to fall, but at this moment, the reincarnation mirror on Su Li's wrist suddenly trembled, and a white light shot out from it, which completely wrapped Su Li without leaking any pneuma. The thunderbolt brewing in the air suddenly stagnated, and suddenly there was no trend to continue to grow. Since Su Li couldn't be found, the heavenly Tao naturally had no reason to send nature's punishment. It could only dissipate on its own after a rumble. Seeing this scene, Fan Zisang and other practitioners in Zhuzhou region were stunned. What's the matter? Is it possible that the mighty practitioner at the tribulation passing stage failed? The old man hiding in the depths of the ground showed a look of horror. He dodged it. He dodged it. He can even shield the mysteries of heaven. If I can follow such an evildoer, his jade-green eyes immediately lit up. Evildoers were not tolerated by the heavenly axiom, but wasn't it the same for an existence like him? If he could gain the approval of that evildoer, perhaps his future would undergo earth-shaking changes. But before that, I have to kill the thief who stole my treasure house first. The old man's face showed coldness, and his mummified body filled up in the blink of an eye. After a few breaths, he returned to the appearance of an ordinary old man. He waved his sleeves and disappeared, rushing to the underground treasure house. At the same time, Su Li, who was in the state of selflessness, finally woke up. Looking at the spiritual power flowing slowly in the unknown acupoints in her body, instead of being possessed by the devil, her first thought was not surprise, but anger. An indescribable rage filled his heart. She had enough of the feeling of being out of control in one life after another. Black Lotus Ring, get out. Su Li raised her right hand and looked at Black Lotus Ring that had no intention to come out. She smiled coldly, are you sure that I can't do anything to you? In the last life, I was used by reincarnation mirror to death, and my soul was scattered. Everything is still vivid in my mind. Do you think that I will continue to be your tool with a fluke just because you saved my remnant soul and remained silent? The smile on Su Li's face gradually became crazy, and her red lips moved slightly. She muttered to herself, I give you 3 breaths. If you don't come out and give me an explanation, you can go to the next body of evil ghost. 3. After saying the first word, Black Lotus Ring was still indifferent. Without saying a word, Su Li pinched a gesture of self-explosion, and the pneuma in her body immediately changed from stable to chaotic. Under the spiritual power riot, several meridians burst in an instant, and blood beads dyed Su Li's clothes red through the pores. Buzz! It was not Black Lotus Ring that responded, but Reincarnation Mirror, which Su Li had always thought had lost its spirituality. Glancing at the mirror ring that was glowing with white light and conveying a sense of pleading, she suddenly smiled. Great! It turns out that there is a deeper hidden one. Reincarnation Mirror, weren't you very arrogant in the last life? Didn't you say that you would kill me every time you opened your mouth? How come in this life, you are reduced to begging me? Anyway, you are an ancient treasure. Where is your face? Reincarnation Mirror suddenly trembled violently, more violently than when it protected Su Li just now. If it could speak now, it might have already scolded Su Li. But now it was refined by Su Li with her blood, and Su Li had become its real master. If Su Li died, it would inevitably disintegrate again. It was unknown how many years it would take to reunite and recover. Maybe, it would be directly abandoned by the river of time and be really destroyed. In this way, it could only plead over and over again. If it could still transform into a spirit, it should burst into tears at this moment, and almost cry while hugging Su Li's thigh. Su Li didn't look at it again, and her eyes fell on the still empty ring finger. 2. The decisive voice came out of her mouth, and the gesture in her hands immediately changed again. A self-destructive force was transmitted, and 80% of the meridians in her body were instantly broken, and the spiritual power was running wildly. If it didn't stop, Suli would only have one end. Death by self-explosion. Black Lotus Ring trembled and finally appeared. It was afraid. The body of evil ghost. It took a lot of effort to condense Suli's remnant soul into the body of evil ghost. How could it be easily destroyed? The lotus mark turned a circle with difficulty, and a cool pneuma came out along Suli's meridians. After passing through the whole body, Suli's meridians were immediately healed, and her pneuma was even stronger than before. Suli raised her eyebrows. She didn't expect Black Lotus Ring to have such an effect. Suddenly, a childish voice sounded intermittently in the awareness sea. Don't, try again. I don't have energy to save you, wait for me, to sleep, to recover. Speaking of this, the voice seemed to be stuck and stopped completely. Black Lotus Ring also disappeared from the ring finger, hidden in the body, and could not be sensed at all. You really don't shed tears until you see the coffin. The madness on Suli's face was no longer, and she put away the gesture with a faint smile on her face. Just now it was just a secret method of body refining, but it was very similar to self-explosion. Oh, by the way, I forgot that you were asleep and should not hear it. When you wake up, let's have a good talk. Hearing that Suli seemed to be muttering to herself, the mirror ring trembled slightly. It finally realized how bad Suli's nature was. Everything just turned out to be an act. But it did not dare to doubt Suli's determination to perish indiscriminately. At present, she was living under someone else's roof, and all hopes were pinned on Suli. It had better be obedient. After frightening the two mysterious treasures in her body, Suli got up and was ready to leave. Her current realm could not be defined. What would it be after the 10th hurdle of Lianqi realm? The 11th hurdle of Lianqi realm. She had never heard of it, but it didn't matter. When Black Lotus Ring woke up, everything would naturally be known. Just as she was about to turn the mechanism and reopen the stone door, suddenly there was a dull sound outside the door. Did the stone door open by itself? No. Suli's eyes were slightly fixed, and suddenly she saw the half-drawn tactical matrix on the ground. Swish! A green light rushed into the stone room like a fleeting light and shadow. When he saw the scattered and almost stolen treasure house, his eyes immediately turned red, and he was furious. Little thief, you are courting death. He had a sense of the stone door. The stone door had only been opened once, which proved that the little thief was still in the treasure house. He immediately released his powerful divine awareness, but no matter how he explored, he could not find the slightest unusual pneuma. Is it possible that the little thief has other ways to leave? The old man was suspicious, but he denied it in the blink of an eye. Impossible. That is the tactical matrix set by me personally. Even a tactical matrix grandmaster can't leave without a sound. This person is still here. The old man's eyes were a little more cautious. The person could hide under his eyes, which proved that the cultivation of this person was not much different from his. But, how could there be a practitioner in Jindan realm in a small imperial court in the secular world? He couldn't figure it out no matter how hard he thought about it. He stepped forward and explored the stone room inch by inch, not letting go of any clues. In the blink of an eye, he came to the place where Suli meditated, but all the traces here were forcibly moved horizontally for a distance of 3 meters. Chapter 351. The green-robed elder walked to the middle of the hidden tactical matrix unconsciously, and the blood-colored lines were immediately activated and appeared. The sealing power invaded his whole body in the blink of an eye. The green-robed elder was horrified to find that his cultivation had fallen from the early stage of Jindan realm to the early stage of Zhuji realm. At the same time, Su Li's petite figure appeared from the side and looked at the elder affectionately. Her cultivation was limited, and it was the limit for her to suppress the green-robed elder by a big realm in a short time. However, the early stage of Zhuji realm, compared with the 11th hurdle of Lianqi realm, which was stronger? The green-robed elder was surprised and doubtful. Looking at Su Li, who was approaching slowly, he couldn't help but be a little confused. How could there be a little girl in Yunti realm in this place? Although he couldn't see the specific bone age, he could infer from his experience that the girl in front of him was no more than 18 years old. The means of sealing cultivation really made the green-robed elder uncertain. Even in the face of Su Li, he didn't dare to use too much tone. He just took a deep breath, raised his head and said loudly to the air, "Senior, you plotted against me and only let your junior come to see me. What do you mean?" Seeing the elder's reaction, Su Li smiled and said in a crisp and childish voice with an extremely unharmonious meaning of ridicule, "Senior, I can't afford it. There is no one else in this place." After that, she took out the universe ring from the treasure house and chuckled, "I stole your things. Why don't you do it?" The elder became more cautious and looked gloomy. "Little girl, for the sake of your elder, I won't argue with you, but don't treat me as an idiot. The tactical matrix that can fool me must be at least in the master realm. How can you, a little girl in Yunti realm, master such a realm?" "Oh." Su Li smiled slightly and stretched out her right hand. Her 5 fingers were slightly spread, and 5 faint black lines appeared out of thin air between her fingers. They condensed into a complex and simple word, matrix, in the nothingness. Ordinary practitioners would feel dizzy just by looking at it. Master's mark. The elder was instantly dumbfounded. As a middle-grade matrix master, how could he not know what the word matrix meant? But the more he knew, the more he couldn't believe it. A master of matrix in Yunti realm. If it was in the past, he would never believe that these 2 words would appear on the same person. But now Su Li, who was alive and well, gave him such a shock that he even forgot to take action. Suddenly, he shuddered as he recalled the terrifying world-exterminating thunderbolt from before. Monster, wasn't it right in front of him? Recalling for a moment, he immediately realized that right below where the thunder tribulation had gathered was this underground treasury. The old man was excited. He pointed at Su Li and blurted out, You are the evildoer who caused the world-ending thunder." Su Li was slightly stunned and puzzled. The thunder test of extinction. The ring of reincarnation mirror trembled, and a trace of thought came out to tell clearly what happened just now, with a faint intention of asking for credit. But Su Li's face instantly became gloomy, and her eyes were full of killing intent when she looked at the old man. He couldn't let anyone know that he was an evil ghost. Seeing Su Li's reaction, the elder was overjoyed and said, "Wait a minute. Little friend, we can work together." Speaking of this, the old man couldn't go on, because Su Li had already attacked him without saying a word. The old man, who put down his status and talked nicely, immediately became angry out of shame. "Damn it, I'm sincere, but you are unreasonable. Even if you are an evildoer, I don't believe that you can defeat me across the iron law of the cultivation circle." While speaking, the old man still didn't want to kill Su Li. There were too few evildoers who went against the natural law. They either died as soon as they were born, or they had already grown up and become the existence he looked up to. Now he met a young evildoer in Yunti realm. Of course, his mind was different. If he could subdue and control her in his hands, when she grew up, he would definitely soar to the sky with her. It was even possible for him to reach the realm of an old ancestor in Huashan realm. Thinking of this, the anger on the old man's face disappeared, and he reached out with a smile to press his palm against Su Li's. Even if his cultivation was suppressed to the early stage of Juji realm, it was not something that a little Yunti realm could resist. In the next moment, the surging black spiritual power surged. The old man, who imagined that Su Li would fly backward, immediately changed his face. With a bang, he flew backward and hit the wall like a cannonball. All the protective tactical matrices on the wall immediately lit up to maintain the stability of the underground treasure house. Cough, cough, cough. Sliding down from the wall, the old man struggled to get up with blood spilling from the corner of his mouth. He kept coughing and looked at Su Li, who was walking slowly, with horror. Was she in Yunti realm? Although he underestimated the enemy, how could a Yunti realm martial artist knock away a person in the early stage of Juji realm? The green-robed old man stared with his old eyes wide open, and instantly felt that he had lived his whole life in vain. It turned out that this was an evildoer. He couldn't help but sigh. No wonder every evildoer had the potential to grow into a powerful person. It turned out that their talent was so terrible from the beginning. Yunti realm was comparable to Juji realm. Wouldn't it be possible to reach Jindan realm after a little practice? He had never seen other young evildoers with his own eyes. After Su Li made a move, he was immediately led astray. But he didn't know that the evildoer in front of him was completely different from the ordinary evildoers who made the heaven jealous. Seeing the green-robed old man in a daze and completely unguarded, Su Li stopped and frowned. She didn't take the opportunity to make a move. In other words, she couldn't make a move. Just now, when she struck out with her palm, she immediately felt a sense of danger, causing her hair to stand on end. She couldn't make a move again, at least not in this place. Although nature's punishment faded away, the natural law had noticed her. If she exposed her pneuma again and was locked, it was unknown whether she could escape. So, she could only change the method. She flicked her hand in the nothingness repeatedly, and a shadow of the word slave gradually emerged. When the green-robed old man came to his senses and saw it, his pupils immediately shrank. Slave seal. If he accepted it, he would be Su Li's slave for a lifetime. He couldn't have the slightest rebellious thought. Otherwise, he would turn into a pool of blood and his soul would scatter. The old man struggled to escape, but his body froze as soon as he moved. He forgot that he was still in the early stage of Juji realm at this moment. He was not Su Li's opponent at all. He couldn't escape, and he didn't want to die. He could only, you are familiar with tactical matrix, so you should know what this is. Su Li secretly took a breath. It was not easy for her to condense the slave seal now. There are two ways in front of you. One is, I accept. Before Su Li finished her words, the green-robed old man had already opened his awareness sea and took the slave seal in. After absorbing the information of the slave seal, he established a connection with Su Li. His eyes were full of respect when he looked at Su Li. He stood up and bowed to serve her. Su Li looked slightly surprised. It was the first time for her to see a practitioner so active in recognizing a master. Moreover, the old man's real cultivation was in Jindan realm, which was much higher than hers now. Seeming to see Su Li's doubts, the old man smiled embarrassedly, Master, speaking of which, my identity can't be exposed to the public. It may be a good way for me to follow an evildoer. Su Li nodded slightly. Knowing the existence of evildoers, and being able to distinguish the thunder punishment and the destruction of the world, it could be seen that the old man's background was not simple. What's your name? Su Li walked out as she spoke, and the green-robed old man immediately followed her. Master, my name is Lvu, and I am a practitioner of Gyo region. Su Li stopped slightly and raised her eyebrows. Gyo region. The home of ghost practitioners? LVU didn't expect that Suli had heard of Gyo region, so he didn't dare to lie and said, exactly. To be honest, I am also a ghost practitioner. But the practitioners of Jojo region, are not very friendly to ghost practitioners. So, I disguise myself with a secret method. Even if I fight, I won't reveal any flaws. Even if she fought, she wouldn't reveal any flaws. Suli suddenly had an idea. She just leaked her pneuma to attract the peeping of the magic blade. If she could perfectly cover the movement of fighting, do you still have the secret method? Of course. LVU took out a jade slip, engraved the secret method on it, and gave it to Suli. Suli took it and didn't look at it carefully with her psychic awareness. She just nodded and said, I accept it, and I have taken away many treasures in your treasure house that are useful to me. I will compensate you later. LVU thought it was a test, and immediately panicked. He waved his hand and said, What are you talking about, master? All my things belong to you. There is no reason not to return them. Suli shook her head and said no more. She had her principles. If LVU didn't recognize her as his master, she wouldn't feel the slightest burden no matter how many things she robbed. But now that he had become one of them, she certainly had to change her approach. After they came out of the well together, Suli spread out her psychic awareness. Seeing that Fan Zisong hadn't returned to Consort Ling, she immediately breathed a sigh of relief and quickly said, Give me your carrier rune. LVU didn't dare to ask the reason, and immediately took out his own carrier rune and gave it to Suli. Suli put it away and left without saying anything. If you have nothing else to do, go to Huajian sect and find a place to stay. I will find you if I need anything. Yes, master. After Suli left, LVU returned to the underground treasure house and put everything in the universe ring. Because of the secret method, the things he had affected the secret method, so he built this treasure house here. He didn't expect that there would be one more master because of it. Huajian sect, I have heard of it. It seems to be a small sect. It's reasonable for master to hide there in order not to attract attention. As the thought flashed in his mind, LVU destroyed the treasure house and went straight to the cave where he practiced in isolation. To be on the safe side, he couldn't leave any trace there. While observing Fan Zisong's route, Suli quickly shuttled in the palace with her body movement. It seemed that her speed was several times faster than Fan Zisong's. After breaking through this weird level, there is indeed something magical. My speed now is much faster than that of practitioners in Juji realm. When Black Lotus Ring wakes up, I must ask it clearly. With such a body movement, it only took Suli dozens of breaths to return to the old palace. Consort Ling and Mammy Hui looked over, and their eyes immediately brightened. Chapter 352. Mammy Hui stepped forward and said anxiously, I don't know why the princess and the commander suddenly fainted just now. Her Majesty and I were so worried. When Suli saw the two people lying on the carpet, her eyes flashed. She quickly walked to them and fell down. Her eyes were closed, and her expression was no different from that of Jining and Jining. Consort Ling and Mammy Hui were dumbfounded. Why did the little fairy faint as soon as she came back? But at this moment, footsteps came from outside the door. Consort Ling could occupy a place in the palace, so she was naturally smart and quick-witted. She reacted quickly and pulled Mammy Hui, who had not yet figured out the situation, aside. Then she stepped forward and naturally showed anxiety and worry on her face. Within half a breath, Fan Zisong appeared in front of the door. Seeing Consort Ling, he anxiously said the same words as Mammy Hui just said. He quickly entered the room to check on the three of them. Then, he heaved a sigh of relief and said, the three of them are still weak. They were only knocked unconscious by the residual power. They will wake up on their own after a while. That's good. Consort Ling breathed a sigh of relief and quietly glanced at Su Li, who didn't show any flaws. She originally thought that her daughter overestimated this woman, but the reality obviously slapped her hard. Putting aside who the real savior was, just this deep and meticulous scheming was not something an ordinary person could compare to. How can a 14-year-old child be so shrewd? Consort Ling couldn't figure it out, but obviously no one could give her an answer to her doubts. After Fan Zisong passed the spiritual power in turn, the three of them woke up after a while. Su Li opened her eyes and saw Fan Zisong saying with a dignified face, "As you can see, the heavenly tribulation has appeared, and the imperial palace is in great danger. Even I can't deal with it. There's no time to lose. Let's leave the palace first and think of a way." He wasn't sure if the lightning tribulation dissipated on its own because of the senior's trick or because the senior had failed to transcend the tribulation. However, for the sake of everyone's safety, he couldn't gamble. Consort Ling's face turned pale when she heard the words, then. "His Majesty, I don't care anymore." Fan Zisong shook his head. "Unless we can find him and take him out now, we will die if we continue to stay here." From the beginning to the end, he only cared about his two junior sisters. The others were not worth his time. Consort Ling didn't expect the situation to be so serious, so she didn't dare to say more. Although she had a friendship with the Emperor, it was not as important as her daughter Jining. After getting everyone's consent, they quickly left the palace. With Fan Zisong's protection, although they encountered some obstacles on the way, they still got out of the palace safely. At the same time, Ning Wang and the Empress, who were in a courtyard outside the palace, immediately received the news. The lightning tribulation appeared above the imperial palace and then dissipated on its own. Which spy sent this back? It's ridiculous. On the bed, Lord Ning, who was bare-chested, crushed the carrier rune. He narrowed his eyes and sneered. He didn't believe it if he didn't see the thunder test with his own eyes. There had never been a thunder test in the entire Jiuzhou region, so there was no practitioner in nature's test. Jin Qinghe is an arrow at the end of its flight, but I didn't expect that he still had a backup plan. We can't find him. My dear sister, what do you think we should do now? He teased softly, and the Empress, who was lying on his chest, twisted her soft waist. Her phoenix eyes were full of charm, and her voice was soft. "Brother Ning has great cultivation. This kind of trifle is not a problem for you. These years, Jin Qinghe's practice place has always been hidden, and he is quite proficient in tactical matrix. If we want to catch him, we need to find a tactical matrix master." As she said, she got up slightly and grabbed an intact carrier rune. She said in a slightly surprised tone, "But before that, we might as well go to see Consort Ling. She was hurt by the evil spirit and should be dead. How could she wake up?" Hearing the word evil spirit, Lord Ning stopped smiling and said slowly, "It's a little strange that you said so. How is the evil spirit?" The Empress turned around lightly, letting her hair brush her chest. Her charming and soft voice came into his ears. "My animal control tactics is not for decoration." Lord Ning laughed, grabbed the Empress's breasts and pulled the quilt. "Then I'd like to see it." Accompanied by a sweet moan, the whole room was instantly filled with the scent of spring. Su Li and her companions left the city in a hurry under the leadership of Commander Wang. They stopped when they came to a courtyard built by the water. As they entered, Su Li introduced it. "This is the yard that the Emperor ordered to be built a few years ago. It has just been completed, and the news hasn't spread. No one should know this place." Fan Zisong nodded. As Commander Wang said, he didn't notice the pneuma of others. "Find a room to settle down first. Junior sister apprentice Jean and junior sister apprentice Sue may have suffered a lot of fright today. I'll go out and set up some precautions." After that, Fan Zisong didn't stay and left quickly. Mammy Hui immediately began to clean up the room. As Commander Wang said, the yard was very new and large, and didn't need to be packed up too much. Except for Jining, who asked to live in a room with Consort Ling, everyone else chose their own room. Suli chose the room in the southeast corner, which was 3 rooms away from other people's rooms. Others were used to her mysteriousness and didn't stop her. Bang! As soon as she closed the door, Suli turned around and saw a green flash in the room. LVU, who had changed into a clean robe, appeared in the room with a respectful look. When the master left the palace, the servant naturally had to follow. You also choose a room, and don't be found by others. Suli ordered in a low voice and turned to the bed. Don't bother me if there's nothing important. Yes, madam. LVU knew that Suli wanted to try the secret method of concealment. Although the secret method could only be practiced by ghost practitioners, he didn't persuade her. Nothing was absolute. His master was an evildoer who could even attract the annihilation thunder. Ordinary rules couldn't be applied to her at all. If he said too much, it would only make his master unhappy, and there would be no benefit. After LVU left, Suli took out the jade slip, quietly explored it with her psychic awareness, and gradually immersed herself in it. After a long time, when Fan Zisong's voice sounded outside the room, she suddenly woke up. She got up, put away the jade slip, and opened the door. In order not to arouse Fan Zisong's suspicion, after having dinner with Consort Ling and others, Suli and Jining stayed with Fan Zisong to ask about the precautions of practicing in Yundi realm, and then went back to the room. After washing, she sat on the bed. Suli took out the jade slip from the universe ring around her neck, and showed a thoughtful look. All Spirits Tactics. The name of this secret method didn't sound gloomy, but it was more like something practiced by the human clan. However, there was a hint in the general outline of the secret method that only ghosts could practice it, or it would cause unpredictable side effects. A ghost, not a ghost cultivator. Suli narrowed her eyes slightly. She had read about the origin of ghost practitioners in the classics of Yushu sect. But because she didn't care about it, her memory was a little vague. But it was undeniable that ghost practitioners were inseparable from the aristocracy. Since ghost practitioners can practice, what's the harm for me, a forbidden ghost clan, to practice it? Thinking of this, Suli recalled the whole operation route of the secret method, took a deep breath, and was about to move her hands. Suddenly, all Spirits Tactics, how can you have this kind of thing? The sudden childish voice immediately stopped Suli's movements, and her heartbeat slowed down by half a beat. But she didn't show any fluctuation on the surface. Instead, she sent a thought, "Are you awake?" The childish voice immediately smiled and praised, "Good state of mind. It seems that your hundreds of years in the reincarnation mirror are not in vain." There was a fluctuation in Suli's eyes, and she calmed down in an instant. She said in an unclear tone, "You owe me an explanation. Is this the attitude to treat your savior?" The childish voice was not afraid at all, and a trace of coldness appeared on Suli's face. "Oh, if there is not enough benefit, how can you do it? Don't talk nonsense." The childish voice didn't get angry but laughed. "You deserve to be the servant chosen by the reincarnation mirror. Your temperament is really extraordinary. Well, I wanted to wait until you reached Juji realm before showing up, but I didn't expect that you could trigger the legendary realm. Let me talk to you. But before that, I want to know who made the all spirits tactics in your hand." Suli slightly pursed her lips. After a while, she whispered 2 words, "Ghost practitioners." "How is your cultivation?" "The early stage of Jindan realm." The childish voice immediately fell into silence, and after a while, there was a sigh, but the reason for the sigh was not explained to Suli. She frowned, but at this time, the childish voice said again, "This all spirits tactics is incomplete. I have the complete all spirits tactics here. You just need to change a few places here, like this." Sully thought about it and immediately took out a piece of paper to record what the childish voice said, and then compared it. She couldn't completely believe the childish voice because she had learned a lesson not long ago. As for your current realm, it is related to a very distant legend in the cultivation circle. It is said that in ancient times, the human clan's cultivation of Lianchi realm was not 10 hurdles, but 18 hurdles. Sully couldn't help but be shocked when she heard the words. 18 hurdles. It should be 8 hurdles more than the current Lianchi realm. It seemed that the childish voice saw through Sully's thoughts, and there was a trace of contempt in the childish voice. Don't compare the current Lianchi realm with the ancient times. The realm you have broken through now is equivalent to the 7th hurdle at most in the ancient times. Only the 7th hurdle. Sully frowned fiercely. Why is the gap between today's cultivation circle and the ancient times so big? You don't need to know this. When your cultivation is higher, you will naturally get in touch with it. The childish voice smacked his lips and continued, "You were really crazy before. You were just cheated by the boy of samsara. Is it worth it? If you take the ancient path of cultivation, it won't take long for you to grasp that small mirror. How about it? Do you want to think about it?" There was a trace of expectation in the childish voice's tone, which immediately exposed a lot of things. Although Sully didn't know why the childish voice had an ancient origin and was somewhat simple, it didn't hinder her thinking. She was silent for a moment and asked, "What benefits can I get from taking the ancient path?" "Naturally, there are many benefits. First of all, you will be invincible in the same realm, and there are many. What price do I have to pay?" The childish voice was interrupted by Sully before he finished speaking. The former immediately choked and was a little dumbfounded. He hadn't finished bragging yet. Chapter 353. The price. The childish voice hesitated, as if it was thinking about what to say and what not to say. But as Sully's expression gradually became cold, it did not dare to delay, for fear that Sully would go crazy like last time, so it quickly said, "Of course there's a price. Choosing the ancient path of cultivation naturally means that the difficulty of cultivation will be much higher than ordinary methods. Moreover, every realm has its own unique test. Every time you pass a test, you'll receive a gift from the unseen." The more the childish voice said, the smoother it was, and it seemed to be endless. But Sully's expression did not ease, and she interrupted coldly, "You know that I am not talking about this. Why do you want me to say more? Tell me, if I take the ancient path of cultivation, I must need your guidance all the way. What are your conditions?" The childish voice revealed humanized embarrassment, and it became more and more depressed. In the reincarnation mirror, it took a fancy to Sully's character. Why did the girl's temperament change so much after coming out of the reincarnation mirror? Was it really stimulated by the reincarnation mirror and became more and more abnormal? "Damn it, reincarnation boy, when I recover, I will not spare you. Even if you are broken, I will put you together and torture you severely." It seemed that the mirror ring hidden in Sully's sleeve had felt the emotion of the childish voice, and it trembled, hiding its pneuma more thoroughly. The childish voice thought bitterly, and finally felt better. It said cautiously, "Little Sully, since you asked, I will tell you. I am not a selfish villain like reincarnation. Let me say the ugly words first. If I tell the truth, you can't abandon me. Say it." Sully was expressionless, and spat out 2 words coldly. The childish voice sighed helplessly, and could only be forced to say, "For some reason, the most precious treasures of many ancient clans were destroyed or disappeared, and I was one of them. After the ghost realm was destroyed, the strength that I could exert was infinitely weakened, and finally I was so weak that I fell into a deep sleep. Even I didn't know where I was. When I woke up again, I was in the illusion of reincarnation. After seeing you, the power that escaped from your body was helpful for recovery, so I bewitched the aristocratic boy to give you the ring, and then forcibly integrated with you. Anyway, the body in the illusion had many defects, so it was not difficult for me to do it. Speaking of this, the lotus on the black lotus ring rotated slightly, as if it was quietly observing Su Li's reaction. Seeing that Su Li's voice was still calm, it continued worriedly, "You know what happened next. I recovered a lot of strength by absorbing the foundation that escaped from your body. After you dissipated in the reincarnation mirror, I forcibly condensed your remnant soul, opened a gap in the reincarnation mirror, and forced you into reincarnation. I should have escorted you until you were born. That way, it wouldn't have taken more than a year for you to be reborn. Unfortunately, my power was exhausted and I fell into a deep sleep halfway. Fortunately, although I wasted 1,000 years, you were still reborn successfully." There was a trace of cold sweat on the back of the child's voice. Thinking of the danger encountered in the past, it could not help but be afraid. It was rare to meet a life that could coexist with it. If Su Li did not succeed in rebirth, it would fall into an endless sleep again. Su Li was silent, but her expression eased a lot. At least compared with reincarnation mirror, Black Lotus ring was honest enough. As for your body of evil ghost, there was some surprise in the child's voice. I didn't cause it at all. If I could create such a taboo, why would the ghost clan be exterminated? When I realized that you were an evil ghost, I was almost scared to death. How many years has it been? Even in the ancient times, the body of evil ghost was as rare as phoenix feathers and Qilin horns. If you can make good use of your forbidden talent, when you grow up, you will definitely be an existence that can sweep across the 3 realms. Su Li fell into a long silence. The information from the child's voice is too much for her to digest. After a long time, Su Li's eyes lit up, and she said softly, "What is your name?" The child's voice sighed with a trace of tiredness, "I don't know. The long sleep makes me forget a lot. I even forget my own name. I'm really ashamed. It's also a blessing for me to meet you with the body of evil ghost. Maybe I can return to my peak by relying on you. As for the name, you can help me choose another one." Su Li's eyes were shining. She didn't know whether the child's voice was true or he didn't want to recall his past. But it didn't matter. What mattered was that it was really loyal to her. As long as there was this, it was enough. There is a black lotus on your body. Let's call it Black Lotus. It's so casual. I protest. So, the new name of the treasure of the Ghost Clan was so casually decided. Although Black Lotus was unhappy, he had to rely on Su Li to live well, so he could only accept it. Ah. I'm so sleepy. I'm still too weak. Your body of evil ghost is not complete. Maybe it's because you stayed in the reincarnation passage for too long. I'll tell you after I have a good sleep. Black Lotus yawned, and the voice retreated from the awareness sea. At the same time, the ring on his finger also drilled into the skin and disappeared. Su Li took a look and took back her right hand. Her eyes were bright, and she was much less confused. With such an old guy, she finally didn't have to fumble and practice. In these 2 days, Su Li's life was very regular. After dealing with Fan Zisong every day, she practiced alone. Since the last breakthrough, her pubic region was much empty. Even if she practiced with the spiritual stone of LVU, it would take several days to fill it. According to Black Lotus, the 18th hurdle of Lianqi realm. I'm in the 7th hurdle, just in the 2nd stage. No wonder the speed of practice has declined. Suddenly, Su Li's psychic awareness shrouding over the yard saw Fan Zisong come back with a dignified face. She finally shifted her attention from practice and began to think about foreign affairs. Fan Zisong obviously encountered difficulties. In Jincheng Dynasty, besides LVU, is there any other practitioner with good cultivation? Thinking of this, Su Li took out the carrier rune and transmitted the psychic awareness. In less than a dozen breaths, LVU appeared in the room with a sound of swish. Master. LVU bowed, but he was a little surprised. Compared with a few days ago, the pneuma of the little master in front of him was very different. It seemed that there had been a great change in her state of mind. However, he naturally wouldn't be so tactful as to ask about these secrets. Go and find out what difficulties Fan Zisong encountered. I've been here for a long time. Su Li said indifferently. LVU immediately nodded and was about to leave. This was the first task given to him by the master, and he must do it well. Wait. Seeing that LVU was about to leave, Su Li pushed the complete copy of All Spirits Tactics on the table forward and said with a smile, "The All Spirits Tactics you practiced is not complete. I have made up for it. Take it and have a look. It's up to you whether you want to practice it or not." Black Lotus Ring was her biggest secret. Naturally, it was not appropriate to tell LVU who had just been recruited. So, she could only take it on herself. LVU was stunned, and his expression suddenly became strange. But he still took the copy on the table and thanked her. He thought that the little master seemed to be a lot more impetuous after avoiding nature's punishment. So, he practiced this method and warned the master with the fact of failure. Master is still too young. I need to guide her well. At the thought that he could guide an evildoer to grow up, LVU suddenly felt a heavy responsibility on his shoulders, but more of a fighting spirit. He hadn't felt such an upsurge of emotion for many years since he made no progress in Jindan realm. With a smile, LVU went back to his hiding room and took out the copy to read it carefully. After a few breaths, the look of wanting to see Su Li make a fool of herself on LVU's face disappeared. Instead, he became serious and indulged in it. In a short time, LVU was calculating something in spite of his sore eyes. His forehead was covered with cold sweat. An hour later, LVU finally breathed a sigh of relief and couldn't help laughing. If he hadn't set a simple soundproof bounded domain in the room, he would have been noticed by Fan Zisong and others immediately. Ha 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 ha, I see. I finally understand. The joy of fully understanding the secret method lingered in his heart. When LVU was about to stand up and find Su Li, he suddenly stopped breathing, and his face was full of horror. At this time, he remembered his original intention. When he thought that he wanted to beat Su Li up shamelessly, he couldn't help but feel a burning pain on his face. How could it be? How old is the master? She is only in her teens. This mental method has really been completed. The effect of hiding the pneuma has been improved more than 10 times. But this all spirits tactics was given to Su Li by him. All the clues on the surface pointed to the only explanation. Evildoer. LVU looked up and sighed, as if he saw the 3 views, which he had built up in the cultivation circle for 1,500 years, collapse suddenly, replaced by a beautiful figure as insurmountable as a mountain. However, with such a master, I don't need to worry about the impassibility of cultivation. No, this time the thing the master ordered must be done perfectly. LVU's old eyes suddenly became hot, and he immediately flew away without staying. Shortly after LVU left, a group of people suddenly appeared not far away from the yard. Their pneuma was unblocked, and they went straight to the yard. The alert tactical matrix was triggered. Fan Zisong, who frowned in the room, immediately sensed it. His face changed slightly, and he pointed at the universe ring with his finger. The cyan steel sword appeared in his hand, and he flew to the gate of the yard. Seeing this scene, Consort Ling showed deep worry on her face, and couldn't help but follow him. "Mother, where are you going?" Looking at Consort Ling's back leaving in a hurry, Jining immediately followed. Commander Wang and Mammy Hui looked at each other and saw the worry in each other's eyes. Then they followed. At the same time, Suli, who was practicing quietly in the room, suddenly opened her eyes with a cold light. This pneuma was a little familiar. Tap, tap, tap. After a burst of messy footsteps, Consort Ling and others rushed to the door. When they saw the scene in front of the door, their faces instantly turned pale. Senior fellow apprentice. With tears in her eyes, Jining looked at Fan Zisang, who was not far away, holding a sword and covered with blood. Then she turned her eyes to the monster in front of Fan Zisang. Her scalp was numb, and her eyes were full of horror. "You're tuning into the LoveLore Library YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure."